Chapter 1326. Warm Their Hearts. Chapter 1326. Warm Their Hearts. _ On an imposing mountain on Black Angle Star in hexagonal Star Land, lights of energy shot out like bright streams flying toward warriors cultivating 8 great power Upanishads. Blood Devil, Benny, Katua, and the others with the blood mark were sitting cross-legged and receiving energy through the blood mark on their foreheads. Their reactions weren't similar. As Blood Devil was an immortal demon, the energy light shot toward him and turned into robust vitality that suited his life power Upanishad. His immortal demon blood surged and created a blood membrane that covered him. Blood Devil's life energy fluctuated terrifyingly inside the blood membrane. He was like an erupting volcano, indeed. Compared to him, the others looked quite calm. Benny was a dark warrior. Light energy came to him and turned into gray wisps seeping into his soul altar. He felt like he was using a hot spring to nurture his soul altar and refine his destruction power Upanishad. As Katua cultivated chaos power Upanishad, when that energy seeped into his body, a massive magnetic field emerged and pulled the trees and rocks around him. Even the guests came to join his magnetic field. All stormed toward him strangely, but he had managed to control them skillfully. Now, all the debris was moving around him. Many other warriors with bloodthirsty power Upanishads had different reactions to this energy. The ones with the dark power Upanishad had disappeared completely in darkness they had created that no light could intrude. The warriors with the corpse chi had gray mist hovering around their bodies without dispersing. They had a cold and een aura too. The other warriors with the rest power Upanishads had also shown their marvelous features. However, evidently, all of them had their energy increase greatly. Many of them were subordinates of Xianhe, Frederick, and Minghao. This time, they received the order to come and support the battle in Fiery Rain Star area. They had only considered Xianhe, Frederick, and Minghao as their real chiefs of bloodthirsty force. They hadn't had much respect for Shi Yan, as they knew he was just a puppet Xianhe, Minghao, and Frederick had built. They had even disdained him. However, at this moment, each of them felt so lucky. They felt lucky that they were assigned to help Fiery Rain Star area and not the others. They felt lucky because they had accompanied Shi Yan. The energy Shi Yan had bestowed them was the same amount if they spent dozens or even 100 years accumulating. The pure energy got through their blood mark and excited them a lot. But what made them astounded the most was that the energy poured into them through the blood mark could be fused perfectly with the power Upanishad they cultivated. It felt like this kind of energy had been customized for each of them. They finally recognized that even Shi Yan's realm wasn't profound enough and his attainment wasn't as outstanding as Xianhe, Frederick, or Minghao. Shi Yan had the inheritance from Bloodthirsty Force's previous master, Bloodthirsty. The devouring power Upanishad was the root of the Bloodthirsty Force. One day, when Shi Yan had reached the immortal realm, he was able to replace Minghao's team and finally gained the recognition from every member of the Bloodthirsty Force. Because of his power Upanishad, he could lead everybody. The devouring power Upanishad could create strong subordinates by increasing their realms and power. In their hearts, they had gradually approved Shi Yan. This kind of approval grew alongside with his growing realm. After an unknown, long time, Shi Yan woke up first. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Zi Yao and Xia Xen Yen standing in front of him, their beautiful eyes studying him. His heart felt warm. He smiled and got up. Where are the others? At this moment, Lin Xen, Yunnan, Yushan, and Feng Han weren't here. Some warriors guarded around the area to prevent the unauthorized from disturbing this area. Besides him and the warriors cultivating the 8 power Upanishads, there were only Xia Xen Yen and Zi Yao here. It seemed like they had stayed to guard him and waited for him to wake up. This time, you've taken a long time to send energy to your subordinates. The others have many things to do. They can't stay here to wait for you all the time. They came back to take care of other matters of business. Zi Yao was like a beautiful, moist flower. She smiled naturally, her eyes twinkling. She had purposely adjusted her hair. Her soft hair draped, but it didn't look messy on her temples. She was wearing a tight, purple dress that lingered close to her skin and exposed her white shoulders and deep cleavage between her dazzling white breasts. Every part of her was so inviting, and it made people get drawn to her. She was the most beautiful flower in Raging Flame's star area. Even though she had moved to Agate's star area, her beauty didn't decrease. As her realm had been increasing, her glamour became more mesmerizing, like an aging, fragrant wine. Staying by her side, Xia Xian was like a quiet, elegant orchid. Her exquisite, oval face always had a faint and cold natural look like water. The two beauties were beautiful in different ways, but they were both dazzling. At this moment, they stood shoulder by shoulder, beaming. Shuryen looked at them and shivered. His soul suddenly had a desire of staying peace and calm. He suddenly felt shameful and guilty to the loved ones standing in front of him now. His entire life had been dedicated for fighting and reaching the acme of his martial path. He didn't have a lot of free time to settle down and enjoy his life. He didn't dare to express his feelings and love for others. The two women standing in front of him now were the closest to him, but the time they had had together was very little. "Are you leaving now?" Xia Xian looked at him quietly. Although her voice was clear, her eyes were glum. She knew that the situation of the universe was still very sensitive. The war happened everywhere, like in Fiery Rain Star area. As the new master of the bloodthirsty force, Shuryen didn't have time to rest. She knew that Shuryen had to leave to go to another star area to fight a bloody war as soon as he woke up. Logically, she understood. However, she was still discontent. It was a woman's nature, so it wasn't something she could change. "You want to leave again?" Ziyao's smile was still bright, but it sounded reluctant too. The waves of light in her beautiful eyes gently rippled and showed her begrudging worries. Looking at the two famous women from everywhere they came, a warm flow of water flowed through Shuryen's heart. He pondered for a few seconds and then beamed at them. "Nah, I'm not hurried. It's okay to take a little rest. Even if I want to leave, I have to wait until Blood Devil, Benny, and Ka-Tua wake up." The gloomy gleam in their eyes cleared instantly. The two women blushed and bit their succulent lower lips. They nodded to him. "Sir, our hegemon advised that if you wake up, you should give us face by visiting the Union. She wants to take all the warriors of Fiery Rain Star area to thank you for your support." A warrior of Fiery Rain Star area wore a respectful face, bowing modestly and begging him. Xia Xian and Ziya showed long, begrudging, and disappointed faces. Shuryen frowned slightly, looking at him and talking faintly. "No need to hurry." With a glimpse of teasing in his eyes, he said suddenly, "I'm going to take you two to do some sightseeing." "Yeah, it could benefit your realms too." As soon as he finished, two space slits appeared underneath Xia Xian and Ziyao. The outer space streamers shot out radiantly. They then scared the women. They paled, but before they could scream, the sticky, tentacle-like bands of streamers had already pulled them into the space slits. When the two slits closed, their frightened screams came. They had just been delivered to a chaotic space basin. The guard of the god defending Union had second sky of ethereal god realm. He looked bewildered when he saw the two women disappearing into the space slits. "I'm really sorry. I agreed to take them to do some sightseeing. Please explain to your hegemon for me." "Oh, right. Tell Feng Han and Lin Xian too. They aren't bound to me. They can make any decision related to their forces. I won't interfere with their own businesses," said Shuryen. Feng Han, Lin Xian, Bath, Gute, Yanqi, and Bing Jie were the leaders of the forces from Agate Star area. This time, they had to spend a lot of effort to take their forces here to reinforce Fiery Rain Star area in resisting the God Clan. In the past, Agate Star area and Fiery Rain Star area didn't have any connection or trade with each other. To these two star areas, the clear connection would strengthen both of them. Fiery Rain Star area had many cultivating materials that Agate Star area couldn't produce, and at the same time, Agate Star area had many rare items that Fiery Rain Star area didn't have. After the recent cooperation, the forces of the two star areas began to discuss the partnership between them. Lin Xian, Yanqi, and Bing Jie were negotiating the business with the forces of Fiery Rain Star area. They wanted to trade with Fiery Rain Star Area, but they weren't so sure about Shi Yan's attitude toward this mutual cooperation. Shi Yan represented bloodthirsty force, the most powerful and mysterious force in this universe. If he wanted to interfere with the business in Fiery Rain Star Area, Feng Han, Lin Xen, and the others wouldn't want to work with him. It wasn't something they wanted to see. Shi Yan had to make himself clear and erase the unnecessary worries that Feng Han and Lin Xen had. Their cooperation with Fiery Rain Star Area would mutually benefit them. I understand. I will tell them your words, the guard bowed to Shi Yan. He admired and complimented Shi Yan a lot. Although Shi Yan was the new master of the bloodthirsty force, he was always tender and polite to others. He didn't sound arrogant at all. The guard sighed as he saw that Shi Yan had a romantic relationship with Xia Xinyan and Zi Yao, the two famous beauties who had charmed many warriors in the two star areas including him. In his thoughts, only a character like Shi Yan could be an equal match to Zi Yao and Xia Xinyan. The guard wasn't jealous. He had just admired and wished them the best because Shi Yan had come here to seize their star area back from the bloody mouth of the God clan. The man left. The respect he had for Shi Yan in his face didn't disappear. Deep in his mind, he had considered Shi Yan the future lord of this cosmos. The conversation with Shi Yan today would be his unforgettable asset later. Shi Yan chuckled. His thoughts flickered and he turned into a beam of light, disappearing at his spot. He had directly entered the chaotic space basin. Chapter 1327, Outer Space Divine Light. Chapter 1327, Outer Space Divine Light. _ So many bunches of brilliant lights crossed each other, expanding in this strange but magnificent land. Not far from them, the shaking explosions arose when many unknown meteorites exploded, sending shockwaves everywhere. They made the void like the expanding, twisting balloon for a while. There was no earth and heaven energy to absorb in this area. Desolation and silence was the eternal host of this place. Explosions, deadly gusts, sharp wind sabers, chaotic currents, and strange seas had created this place, the chaotic space basin. This area was infinite. No one had ever found its boundary, and no one could ever investigate the magical mysteries in the chaotic space basin. Usually, only the warriors cultivating space power Upanishad could survive in such an area. Of course, the high existences at the profound realm like the immortal realm experts could still survive here if they could find the way to get in and out. However, they had to face the dangers in every minute. At this moment, Xia Xinyan and Zi Yao were staying inside an energy light cage hovering above a gorgeous, strange land. Looking at the surroundings, their beautiful eyes sparkled. Right in front of them, waves of explosions had created the blinding halos, which was so beautiful like the most marvelous firework performance. They felt so touched. The magnificent scenery here wasn't something they could find in any star area. Although it was so deadly dangerous, it was filled with miracles and mysteries that could somehow amuse people. However, they had to consume their god power rapidly. Although they didn't move, they needed to use the god power to create the light cage to protect themselves. The outer space dreamers here could attack them and shatter their bodies in any minute. It's so beautiful. What we see here should exist only in the dream. I could never think of how marvelous it is. Zi Yao looked so fascinated. Looking at the brilliant explosions around, her beautiful eyes twinkled. Different from her, Xia Xinyan looked scared as if she was recalling bad memory. Her soft body shivered as she felt so chilled. Hey, are you alright? Seems you were afraid of this place a lot. Zi Yao was surprised. Many years ago, I've had to move through the turbulent space current. It was also a spacelet, developed from a broken space passage. Although it wasn't as lethal as this area, the impression I had back there, I would never forget. Xia Xinyan sighed, her face frightened as if she was replaying that piece of memory. That year, she and many warriors of the Pure Land had to use the space passage in the ice and fire secret domain as their last resort. That space passage had already shattered, so it led to the chaotic space basin. After they had struggled through that passage, they arrived in the shadow ghostly prison of the Agate Star area. However, not many people could make it to the safe harbor. The others had fallen inside the space current. The terrifying death traps had erased their lives. At that time, she was so much weaker than today, but the space passage they had taken had just connected to the space current for a while after it had shattered. It was safer than the area, the real chaotic space basin they were hovering now. Looking at the familiar surroundings, she recalled the painful memory, and the chilled intent flooded her. Anyway, Shiryen suddenly appeared by her, smiling. Actually, you can stay here well. Today, you're not yourself that year. Put away this light cage and move around. I'm here. I will take care of you well. Don't worry. Forget it. Xia Xian shook her head, smiling begrudgingly. I don't dare to act rashly in such a place like this. You can do it, encouraged Shiryen. With a serious face, he hissed, the memory when you got to the agate star area through the space passage and the ice and fire secret domain is an evil barrier in your heart. You don't dare to recall it. I know the abilities of your power, Upanishad. You can rewind time to come back to the dusted pieces of memory. That's how you can break through continually. Those breakthroughs are based on a foundation. At that point in time in the past, you had already broken through that realm. Pausing for a while, he said, recently, you can't break through continually anymore. I can see that your god powers reached the bottleneck to break through again. Xia Xian changed her face when she listened to him. You can see that. Shiryen nodded. My previous lives had reached only the first sky of incipient god realm. I don't have any piece of memory about the experiences in the breakthrough of the second sky of incipient god realm, explained Xia Xian. Previously, every time she broke through to the new realm, she just needed to accumulate energy. She didn't need to understand her power deeply, because at that time, the experiences she had had from the previous lives would come to her and filled her attainment. It had saved her time and efforts, though. However, she didn't have this abnormal advantage anymore. It was because she hadn't reached the second sky of incipient god realm in her previous lives. In other words, if she wanted to break through again, she had to depend on her own efforts and her delicate understanding of the power. When she was on the reincarnation island, De Carlos had sent her the flow of pure energy. At that time, her god power was brimming. She had reached the bottleneck to break to the second sky of incipient god realm. She couldn't continue to advance her realm because of this. She didn't have the comprehension required for the second sky of incipient god realm. From now on, her cultivation depended only on her innate talents. However, the piece of memory when she came to the agate star area that year had become an evil barrier in her heart. She didn't dare to face. She didn't dare to find herself through it, so she was bound. As long as she still had this barrier, she couldn't break through again. Shiryen wanted to bring her here to break that barrier in her mind, giving her a chance to reflect her own inner world. If you want to lift up that evil barrier, you have to open your heart. Retrieve the light cage. Move around. Don't worry. Count on me. Shiryen guided her step by step. I'm here. You're safe. You'll be all right. The space current isn't as terrible as you think. In the past, you would be afraid of it. But now you aren't. You have me here. You can just take a walk around the place. His voice charmed her heart. With his encouragement, Xia Xian's cold eyes became resolute. All right. The light cage covering her vanished. Her soft body exposed in the chaotic space current. Immediately, the outer space streamers attacked her, sending the unknown energy dregs into her body. They wanted to destroy her body. That year, she had experienced the same things. That painful, familiar feeling revisited her. Her complexion changed instantly. Her natural placid face collapsed as she cried. Use your god power to wash your entire body. Use your god power to force the dregs out of your body. You must maintain a clear soul altar. At that time, your body and soul won't have a leak. Nothing can intrude your body then. Shiryen suddenly shouted, his thunder voice echoing in Xia Xian's head. Xia Xian's soft body shivered. Her beautiful eyes weren't frightened anymore. They became clear when her face suddenly had a faint but bright halo. She believed in Shiryen. She didn't hesitate but follow his instruction. Xia Xian Yen urged the energy in her god power ancient tree, circulating around her body to push the energy remnant and the other pollutants that had intruded her. She kept her mind clear and sound to control her power. A magical feeling came out from her body as if someone was enjoying the passing time. She looked as if she was walking around the long river of time, visiting the past and foreseeing the future. It was so magical and yet unpredictable. Space and time power Upanishads were extremely mysterious. It was really hard to understand and master these two power Upanishads. However, learning time power Upanishad was much more difficult than cultivating the space power Upanishad. It was tough to catch the delicate feature of it. Even the God clan didn't have any scripture about time power Upanishad. In history, the number of warriors cultivating time power Upanishad was much smaller than that of space power Upanishad. Thus, Xia Xian Yen had no teacher. If she wanted to advance further to the next realm, she had only herself to count on. Interesting. I should try it too, Xia watched, smiling. She put away the light cage, exposing her body. She had only the peak of ethereal god realm, still a big step away from the incipient god realm. However, when she retrieved her light cage, she looked so calm. Since she didn't experience the terrible pain Xia Xian Yen had had that year, she didn't have a barrier in her mind. Thus, she could be even calmer. A strange light twinkled in her beautiful eyes. She suddenly asked, "Do you feel really comfortable too?" Yen was stunned, asking, "What do you mean?" "It feels like soaking in a hot spring. A magical energy seeps into your body, and then you feel your bones and veins become tougher. Can you feel that?" She smiled happily. "No, nothing at all." Yen was so surprised, looking at her as if he was watching a monster. You feel cozy without using the god power to protect your body? It feels like soaking in the hot spring? Are you sure? Yen knew that no creature could adapt to this area, including the warriors cultivating space power Upanishad like him. Although they could avoid many dangers in this area, they couldn't absorb any kind of energy here. Because this area had no earth and heaven energy. All it had was the deadly, murderous energy that no one could absorb. If they didn't use the light cage to protect their bodies, it would feel like the fish getting out of the water. They would never be able to adapt to this sort of harsh environment. However, Ziyao looked apparently enjoy it a lot. She felt comfortable like the fish swimming in the sea. So strange. I'm sure. It's really cozy. Ziyao's white arms moved as if she was a flying butterfly gliding leisurely through the fierce storm. However, nothing seemed to affect her. Yan's eyes had a strange light. You can still increase your energy to cultivate here. I didn't mean to cultivate here. But some kind of energy has initially entered my body. Ah! She suddenly screamed, her beautiful face joyful. Do you remember that I have a special power Upanishad? I got it when I was collecting outer space streamers. The outer space streamers also have life consciousness. It's somehow similar to the heaven flames. Do you remember that? Yes, I do, Yen nodded. The aura of this area and the aura of the outer space streamers I used to take are similar. I can feel some streamers with the consciousness come from this place. This place seems to be their home. It gives me a dear feeling of coming home, Ziyao mumbled as if she was dreaming. Yen listened to her quietly. He became baffled eventually. Chapter 1328, Walking Free. Chapter 1328, Walking Free, _ Ziyao was like an agile butterfly, floating and flying around. Colorful light radiated magnificently from her body. It had 9 colors including tangerine, cyan, purple, blue, white, green, yellow, black, and gray. 9 different colored lights emitted from Ziyao's body. Gradually, they became like ribbons that made her more mesmerizing. The energy fluctuating from her body condensed and accumulated as beautiful light radiated from her. It seemed like her words were true. She could still gather energy in this chaotic space basin. Moreover, she could do that at a faster speed and more productive rate than in any other environment. It was unbelievable. Suddenly, Yen remembered what Ziyao had told him about her power Upanishad. It was a special light power Upanishad that was different from the light power Upanishad that the God clan had cultivated in features and auras. Ziyao's power Upanishad was learned from outer space dreamers. The divine light was a very special sort of light. They came from miraculous areas somewhere in this universe. Most of them had a simple consciousness. They could move freely and enter creatures' bodies or have some spectacular changes. This kind of outer space divine light often moved through the sea of stars like shooting stars. They flashed and disappeared. Not many people could grab a good chance to see them, let alone catch it and get it into the body to create a special light power Upanishad. Ziyao got the outer space divine light and merged it into her body. She had developed this power Upanishad and slowly advanced it. This was an extremely God-given talent, indeed. However, this power Upanishad was rare and not many people could cultivate it, let alone cultivate it to a profound level. Rumors said that it was very difficult to break through in this power Upanishad. It would be easier if the warrior could continuously absorb the outer space divine light. Unfortunately, the divine light in this cosmos was really rare. The other people perhaps wouldn't have even a chance to see them. Although the warriors cultivating this power Upanishad could recognize and locate the outer space divine light, it was just a dream if they wanted to find and capture a lot of them in this vast sea of stars. Today, after Ziyao retrieved her protecting light cage and exposed her body in the chaotic current, she looked comfortable. Amazingly, she could even cultivate here freely. Her cultivating speed was much faster than when she cultivated on any high-level life star out there. Shuryen, Xia Xin, and most of the warriors could never be able to absorb the energy Ziyao was taking in. She didn't even do anything to gather them into her frame and flesh. After a while, the 9-colored halo and ribbons were moving around her and making her a precious deity. Well, it's strange though. I couldn't think that where Xin considers the toxic land is your auspicious land, Shuryen sighed. I couldn't believe that I can continue to cultivate in this area. It's really awesome. The energy in this place and the divine light I had collected have the same aura. I think they share the same origin. Oh! Over there, the aura is thicker. I'm going there to check. Ziyao smiled tenderly. She swiftly flew away like a river of light, her speed very fast. Why don't you follow her to see? Xia Xin smiled. She didn't look frightened anymore. The beautiful light rippled in her eyes. It seems like I don't need to worry about her here. In this place, seems like she won't encounter many dangers. Shuryen rubbed his chin, looking like he was contemplating in the direction Ziyao had just disappeared. She has a seal of mine on her body. In this area, my soul consciousness can locate her at ease. I can teleport to her instantly. Oh, you're so thoughtful and caring. Since when have you become so sensitive and dedicated? Xia Xin teased him, her voice sour. Shuryen was astounded. A woman's heart was like the sea, indeed. Shuryen understood this proverb deeply now. When he was in Black Angle's star to send the energy to Blood Devil and the others, his hearing wasn't affected. He had heard all that Xia Xin and Ziyao had told each other. He thought that they were like close sisters. Thus, he slightly showed his care to Ziyao. Unexpectedly, Xia Xin immediately showed that she was jealous, though. Well, I always am. Shuryen beamed and moved. He had crossed the distance and appeared like a ghost by her. His large hand was placed on her soft, jade-like hand. A flow of vitality was transmitted into her body and was flowing through her veins. Since he couldn't send pure energy to her body the way he had sent energy to Blood Devil or Ka-Tua, he could only send the vitality that he had condensed to her. He could only use the power from the immortal demon blood to take care of her. Xia Xinyan's soft body quivered when the flow of life energy moved warmly in her body. She said, "You don't need to do that. I got enough energy in my body. Also, when you were in Thunder Firmament Star area, someone suddenly gave me a condensed energy ball. It somehow relates to you." Shuryen held her small, soft hand and frowned. "Are you sure?" "I can see the past." Xia Xinyan's beautiful eyes sparkled strangely. "That piece of past happened in the space current. That man stayed here, condensed the energy, and then gave it to me. I can show you a vague scene." Come into my ethereal extent. Shi Yan was surprised. He sent a wisp of his soul to her open ethereal extent. As soon as Shi Yan got in her ethereal extent, he was stunned. Her ethereal extent was extremely spectacular. It was a place full of shattered images like thousands of screens. His soul flew freely inside her ethereal extent, and he felt like he was reading her memory to know what she had experienced. She was completely relaxed. She opened her innermost place to let him examine. Suddenly, a piece of a broken image came near to him and the character inside began to move. Shi Yan saw the chaotic space current and DeCarlos, who was gathering and condensing energy taken from the ice and fire power Upanishad of Cook and Jeremy. He threw it to the space slit and it fell on Xia Xianyan's body. Shi Yan was so amazed. He couldn't believe that Xia Xianyan told him the truth. The energy she had received was related to him. It was he who had forced Cook and Jeremy to combine the best power to create that earth-shaking ice and fireball. Shi Yan wanted to pull it into the space slit, but DeCarlos had taken it earlier and given it to Xia Xianyan. Shortly after, Shi Yan flew out of Xia Xianyan's ethereal extent. That man is called DeCarlos. He's the expert with the best space power Upanishad in this universe in this age. As far as I know, he has reached second sky of immortal realm. Very excellent. But why did he send that chunk of energy to you? I can't understand him. Me neither, Xia Xianyan shook her head. DeCarlos was the expert with the most thorough understanding of space power Upanishad in this universe. He wouldn't do anything in vain. He must have had some idea when he condensed the pure energy and gifted it to Xia Xianyan. Shi Yan wore a dark face and thought. However, as he couldn't make head or tail of it, he decided to put it aside. Can you face the evil barrier in your heart now? Do you still feel like that invisible barrier exists? How could I make it that fast? I need more time to get used to this place and erase the fear. She smiled tenderly, but also weakly. Her bright eyes were so mild. Before I do that, can you stand by me until I adapt to the terrifying dangers in this area? I sure can. Shi Yan looked to the area ahead of them and thought. Then, he encouraged her, in this area of turbulent space currents, all gusts, icicles, explosions, and streamers are fatal. Normal incipient God realm experts can't escape easily. Those really powerful things can even hurt immortal realm experts. You can move. You shouldn't stand still. I will watch over you. Before you encounter a deadly danger, I will warn you. All right. Xia Xianyan stooped and smiled. She moved swiftly like a shadow in Ziyao's direction. Shi Yan smiled and followed her. They flew through the endless space slit one after another. Sometimes they exchanged looks. Sometimes they chatted. Their souls felt quiet and peaceful. The bands of light exploded and sent sparks everywhere, which looked so magnificent. Sometimes, they saw snowflakes coming out of nowhere bringing cold energy with them that could even freeze and crack an entire planet. There were also fiery flames rolling up to the sky as if they wanted to burn everything down. Although she was flying inside a place with so many death traps and turbulent energy, Xia Xianyan never felt so safe and happy. It was because Shi Yan was by her side. The nightmare experience from many years ago seemed to fade after several days moving through a chaotic space basin with countless dangers. Eventually, she recognized one thing. It wasn't like in the past. She could survive even in the much harsher environment. In this area, there was no concept of time. Both Shi Yan and Xia Xianyan didn't know how long they had been here. They flew and accompanied each other. Sometimes they kissed, holding hands and enjoying the rare peaceful moments. They enjoyed the chances to be together as lovers. Until one day, Shi Yan was shocked. Their peace was broken quickly. What? Xia Xianyan frowned. The massive, deadly explosions created by moving streamers happened continuously around them beautifully. They were sitting on a strange, floating rock and talking about the events in the past. All of a sudden, Shi Yan shivered. He looked frightened. I can't sense her existence anymore. Xia Xianyan knew who he was just mentioning. Her face also changed. Why is that? Didn't you tell me that you've put a seal in her body? As long as we are here, can't you easily locate her? Did she leave this place and return to Fiery Rain's star area or Agate star area? Impossible. She doesn't cultivate space power Upanishad. She can't find the exit. Shiryen shook his head and frowned. His face grimaced. What kind of character that could erase the seal you've planted? Asked Xia Xian. The immortal realm experts. But it's not that. Because if it happened that way, my soul would feel numb. I didn't feel pain. I'm sure the seal is still there, but I can't locate her. It's so strange. Shiryen darkened his face, his eyes sparkling. Chapter 1329, Sly Land. Chapter 1329, Sly Land, _ The chaotic space currents hid so many death traps, including loud and terrifying explosions, cutting gusts, burning flames, and sharp icicles that even the immortal realm experts couldn't wiggle to get rid of them. That year, Shinro, the chief of despair force at the immortal realm, went here to find bloodthirsty's remains. Since he couldn't gather energy in this area and continuously drained his own energy, he was exhausted and confined in this area until he was completely gone. Although he was at the immortal realm, he still had to die under the patient erosion of time. Ziyao had only third sky of ethereal god realm. Although her power Upanishad was special, the connection with her was gone. If she encountered deadly dangers or any other malicious expert, no one could predict the results. It wasn't only Shiryen who could come here. As long as they were the warriors with the successful space power Upanishad, they could visit this place as often as they pleased. Even the warriors who didn't cultivate space power Upanishad could get here if he found the entrance. When Shiryen was in Broken Star Field, he was pulled into a space split in Agate Star area after the void there had shattered. He met Carlos, Ibaka, and Kristen there. Those three didn't have bodies anymore. Because of the soul-refining fluid, they had captured Shiryen and McGee of Evil Dragon Tribe. Without the body, the soul could move faster. However, it was a disadvantage when fighting a warrior who had a body. Shiryen knew that many people exploded shortly after they were dragged into this area accidentally. They could only survive in their soul forms. Of course, the warriors with profound realms could resist the erosive process of the turbulent space currents. They could even endure it for several thousand years. Perhaps Shinro had survived here for several thousand years before his god power had drained, which put him to death. The beams of soul consciousness flashed in his brain. Shiryen was calm like water. He chanted Ziyao's name in his head. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The drops of ruby demon blood floated in front of his forehead and lined up into the pyramids with the pointy top and the large foundation. Shiryen had reached second sky of incipient god realm, and he had just absorbed so much energy that he had to share it with the others. Currently, his body was filled with immortal demon blood. The drops of shining blood hovered in front of him and condensed. When he triggered its energy, the demon blood turned into liquid and released surging vitality. Now, he had demon blood filling his body so he could use as much as he wanted. Thus, he used 36 drops and stacked them into a pyramid of blood. It was really a waste to use 36 drops of blood just to find someone. But at this moment, Shiryen didn't have the extra effort to care that much. His thoughts changed while he chanted Ziyao's name. The pyramid of demon blood in front of him seemed to melt and merge together, radiating the blood lights. Swoosh! Suddenly, all the demon blood drops turned into a pyramid mark and moved. It flashed and then disappeared from Shiryen's sight. As Ziyao was at peak of ethereal god realm, when Shiryen used a lot of demon blood like that to track her life magnetic field, even if she was in some faraway star area, Shiryen believed that he could still pierce through innumerable barriers to locate her. Xia Xian stayed quiet. She didn't disturb him. Her bright eyes curiously assessed his work. When she saw the blood pyramid form and fly away, she looked amazed and touched. At that moment, the energy surging from Shiryen could be compared to energy from an expert at peak of incipient god realm. Xia Xian thought he was even a little more powerful than that. She was so touched. Eventually, she recognized that the young man who hadn't been able to surpass her in the past was thriving and reaching heights that she couldn't catch up to. It's so strange. I used 36 drops of immortal demon blood to find her. Even if she's several star areas away, I should have located her already. Why did I get nothing? Strange. Really strange. Shi Yan mumbled skeptically. Then, he didn't wait for Xia Xian to talk and reached for her delicate waist. Their shadows flashed and moved. Swoosh. Swoosh. Xia Xian immediately felt the gusts around become more terrifying. The strange scenes changed continuously as they moved like a shuttle between the space slits. This speed was something over her imagination. I can't identify her exact location. I can only tell the general direction. I think she didn't encounter a strong enemy. She's in some place magical that can stop my sensitivity. Shi Yan lowered his voice, his soul altar spinning gently and releasing space energy. The chaotic space basin was immensely vast without borders. No one had ever discovered it to the very end. This place had only endless isolation and dangers. If they were careless, the warriors could have both their bodies and souls perish in this strange piece of the void. Only the warriors like Shi Yan, the ones with the space power Upanishad at profound realms, could go around here freely. Just like a beam of light piercing through the river from the past to the present, Shi Yan held Xia Xian and moved forward in the middle of the deadly destructive energy waves. He became more grave. He didn't expect Ziyao to be so far from him like that because he had just traveled through a distance equal to the length between the far west point to the far east point of Agate Star Area. In a short period like this, Ziyao, who didn't have the space power Upanishad and was at only peak of ethereal god realm, couldn't cross such a distance. It was unbelievable to Shi Yan. Shi Yan halted. It's strange here. Xia Xian screamed and moved around. She looked astounded. Yeah, really strange. Shi Yan furrowed his brows deeply. This area was the upper limit of his sensitivity. Through the demon blood, he had reached this area where so many dark clouds were hovering. Those dark cotton clouds looked as if they had already stuffed the space. The murky raindrops chained together and connected both ends of the void. Not far from them, the lightning and thunder were dancing like massive, howling beasts. The rolls of gusts swarmed over with momentum that could blow even the soul altar out of the body. Further ahead, explosions boomed continuously. After each time, the void had a new hole that looked like a new entrance to this chaotic space basin. Even Xia Xian, who didn't cultivate space power Upanishad, could see the strange situations here. Shi Yan discolored slightly. He immediately turned to look in a direction where there was a jet-black cluster of a cloud. A faint shadow had just flashed. Just like a beam of starlight, Shi Yan reached the cloud in just a blink of an eye. As soon as he got near, he felt chilled. His frame and veins made crack sounds as they were frozen. It was just a cloud, but the cold energy it bore was so powerful. Shi Yan had to use the heaven flames of the origin. The burning heaven flame moved 9 rounds around his body to neutralize the cold energy. He focused on that cloud. His face grimaced. The cloud was like a viscous substance that covered someone. The victim of the cloud looked gray, and it gave people a thick sense of death. Shi Yan knew this man. He was Spark. He was Elder Spark of the God Clan's Elder Committee, an expert at the false immortal realm. Shi Yan had damaged his celestial ice jade flake, so he had to jump into the space current to find his life treasure. However, with his cultivation base, even if his soul was hurt, Spark shouldn't be in this dangerous situation. Inside the viscous cloud, Spark seemed to have lost his consciousness. His gray eyes weren't lively. His face didn't have normal emotions of an alive human. He looked faint and numb. Looking at him, Shi Yan thought that he was watching a puppet without a soul. He suddenly felt so chilled that his hair rose. It's so peculiar here. He found Spark here because of his weak life energy fluctuations. Shi Yan understood it, so he came to check. His thoughts changed. He turned into a dim shadow and dashed toward the nearest cloud. Carefully keeping a safe distance, he observed it from above. Shi Yan winced. He found another person stuck inside the nearest cloud. It was a stranger he didn't know. That man was stuck inside the cloud like Spark, but he didn't have a bit of life in him anymore. He looked like a statue that Shi Yan didn't know how long he had been petrified there. He continuously checked the other clusters of clouds. After a while, he returned to Spark. There were more than dozens of thousands of clouds here, and many of them had captured a warrior inside. Shiryen found some empty clusters too. They looked like demons with open mouths, waiting for the right moment. He felt his hair on his nape rising. He felt so chilled indeed. Do you know him? Xia Xianyan quietly came and carefully avoided the clusters of dark clouds. She stood by Shirya and asked. His name is Spark, an experienced elder of the God Clan's Elder Committee at the False Immortal Realm. He was based in Fiery Rain Star area. He had troubled Yunnan and Blood Devil a lot. Shiryen took a deep breath. Many clusters of clouds around here have captured a warrior inside. Most of them are dead. Only this man still has a wisp of life in him. Xia Xianyan discolored in fear. Suddenly Spark wiggled. His eyes became clear. Looking at Shiryen, he shouted, "Kill me. Hurry! Kill me!" Xia Xianyan was frightened. She hurried to back off. Spark had scared her. Shiryen looked stern and focused on Spark. "Why are you like this? What happened? Have you seen a girl in a purple dress around? Tell me now. Kill me. Leave this place at once. It's my advice to you. Kill me, please." Spark screamed as if he had lost his mind. While he was still crying, the intestines in his abdomen moved and tore his skin, reaching out like a rod and attempting to capture Shiryen. "Erg!" Spark screeched mournfully. The lucid gleam in his eyes disappeared. He became a dead puppet again. It looked like his soul was occupied. Chapter 1330. The Anonymous Evil Thing. Chapter 1330. The Anonymous Evil Thing, _ Something alerted Shiryen immediately. He hugged Xia Xianyan and left the area, his face as cold as ice. Sizzle. Sizzle. Spark's veins and intestines were like smart and agile snakes, aiming at Shiryen to coil him. At the same time, a cold and evil aura came together with those snake-like intestines and blood veins. Unexpectedly, it seeped into Shiryen's sea of consciousness and slowed down his soul altar. That cold and evil aura was like the soul consciousness of a terrifying soul that was able to affect and confine the warrior soul. Boom! A strong blow suddenly hit his chest. Shiryen couldn't believe it and he looked at Xia Xianyan. Xia Xianyan wore a numb face. She seemed to have gotten possessed. She was now a puppet that didn't have control over her body. Her cold eyes didn't sparkle with human emotions anymore. They were cold and sharp like ice. She had just attacked Shiryen at his chest and gotten rid of his embrace. After she got loose from him, she didn't attack Shiryen more. She indifferently moved towards a hovering cloud not far from her. That cloud was empty and it opened like an evil mouth waiting for food to come. Not good. Shiryen's eyes became rough. He didn't need to think to know that Xia Xianyan was controlled by that evil force. Her soul was confined now. Sizzle. 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 The veins and intestines from Spark's body became like evil snakes or demons' tongues. They were swift and agile with auras that could enchant the soul. They came like lightning. Swoosh. 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 Shortly after, the burning flames flew out from Shiryen's body and turned into a seething fire sea. The aura of the heaven flames was released and it filled the area. The veins and intestines sizzled inside the heaven flames. They immediately retreated into Spark's chest. The last bit of life on Spark's face disappeared. He was now filled with a dead aura. With heaven flames moving around, Shiryen became a burning man and he shot out. He flashed and then appeared by Xia Xianyan, extending his hand to catch her. Blurp! 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 All of a sudden, strange noises arose from the clouds around him. Those noises sounded like some liquid boiling, a gushing stream, or something gulping. Swish! Swish! The beams of some mucus, gray substance like saliva drooling from the stinky mouth of some beast suddenly shot out from the dark clouds. All of them had the same target. Shiryen! Shiryen sneered. His god power burst out and made the sea of fire on his body furier. A dark red fire came with Shiryen's soul consciousness detached from the sea of fire and moved quickly towards Xia Xianyan. Xia Xianyan had a numb face before she was shrouded inside the flame. When the scorching flame covered her, Its aura switched from burning to freezing. This switching was smooth and magical indeed. A cold current directly seeped into her brain and released an extremely cold but clear aura that cleaned her soul altar. Her beautiful eyes resumed lucid. Her face changed when she pressed her 2 thumbs on her eyes. A strange ability of time was urged. The miraculous replay appeared. It seemed like she had recovered her condition to the time before she was possessed by the evil energy. In her eyes, after her time had flown backward, the unknown aura that had invaded her had disappeared. The time power Upanishad was so magical and inexplicable. A warrior who cultivated it to a profound level could stay in his prime condition forever by locking his time. After Xia Xian recovered, her eyes became so cold. She looked at the clusters of dark clouds around and whispered, "Be careful. Something evil is here." Right at this moment, more sticky fluid fell into the sea of fire that Shuryen had created. Strangely, those beams of thick fluid weren't burned or evaporated. They could survive in his sea of fire made of the heaven flames. Although they smoked, they still persistently went towards his body. Shuryen was a little shocked. Since he was blended into this world, he hadn't seen many things that could survive heaven flames. He couldn't believe that this sort of anonymous, sticky substance was so frightening. Extinguish. He placed 1 finger on the glabella. The soul altar released the dazzling heaven flame again, but fiercer this time. After another fusion, Shuryen now had 4 types of heaven flames to use. He had just released one of them. A new flow of heaven flame came with fine electric beams and lightning bolts, and even the aura that could erode the soul. It was the combined flame of the world-extinguishing thunder flame, the 9 serenity soul-devouring flame, and the ice-cold flame. This heaven flame had dancing lightning and a soul-devouring aura that boosted its power to the acme. The mucus substance couldn't resist it. However, it wasn't melted down. All beams of this evil, sticky thing immediately got rid of the sea of fire and returned to the dark clouds. It's possible that one of those clouds has captured Ziyao. Xia Xian dashed forward and stood by Shuryen. Her face was cold and her eyes were worried. At the false immortal realm, Spark was trapped inside the dark cloud. If Ziyao was confined, it was hard to say if she could endure until now. "I'm going to send more fire." Pondering, Shuryen released the combined flame of the immemorial demonic flame, the Een spirit ghost flame, and the corpse vanishing flame. He had boosted the power of the flame around him to be several times higher. With Shuryen as the center, the sea of fire expanded rapidly. The top young, hot flame turned into flows that covered the dark clouds around and attempted to burn them into ashes. "I don't care who or what you are. I just want you to give me the girl wearing purple clothes. As long as she's all right, I won't burn you down. I will leave you in peace here." Shuryen closed his eyes and mouth, releasing his soul consciousness like the storm in the sea of fire. He sent wisps of soul consciousness in every direction. Shuryen believed that as long as it was some high-level creature with a soul, it could receive his wisp of soul consciousness and understand him. This time, Ziyao was missing, and it was a big possibility that those jet-black clouds had captured her. Shuryen didn't know if Ziyao was still alive. If he risked everything to defeat the enemy, there was a chance that Ziyao wouldn't survive even if he won. Thus, the first thing he had to do was to ensure that Ziyao could survive. That's why he decided to use the soul to communicate. Unfortunately, his soul message couldn't achieve the desired effect. In fact, there was no response. Those clusters of clouds were like dead things or objects that didn't have a consciousness. They were there, still. Shuryen didn't receive a reply. Shuryen wore a dark and cold face. He lowered his voice, "Then don't blame me for destroying this place entirely." Boom, boom, boom. Just like a bursting flood, heaven flames rumbled inside the sea of fire. The fire flew out and hit the clouds and the warriors covered inside precisely like the meteorites. Apparently, those warriors were dead. There was no bit of vitality in their bodies. However, Shuryen had a feeling that they still had a flow of consciousness that was scattered like the wisps of the Thunder Dragon soul in the Star Area barrier. However, the difference here was that Lady's scattered soul didn't have consciousness. It had only memories and a pure aura. After all the wisps were reunited, Lady was revived and had regained his consciousness and cognition. However, the flow of consciousness in those warriors' bodies seemed to be able to survive individually. It was like Ming Hao's soul control power Upanishad that could make each wisp of his soul a clone of his. That's how they had many Ming Haos in different star areas. The consciousness that Shiyan could feel in those clouds was similar to Ming Hao's condition. Explode them, Shiyan shouted. The scorching flames swarmed over and attacked a big cloud. The impact was so earth-shaking. Just like the constant explosions not far from them, the explosion from this impact had created holes in the void like an entrance leading to other areas. However, the explosion and the heat from the heaven flames couldn't burn and extinguish the ink-like clouds. They weren't affected. They just shrank a little bit. The strange rain still fell and connected the sky and the underworld. However, at this moment, it suddenly became fiercer. The sprinkle had become a downpour. In this area of chaotic space currents, this kind of rain shouldn't happen. However, it occurred now. The raindrops were like a demon's tears with an extremely strong piercing power. They came like falling daggers. Shiyan's face changed again. The evil and peculiar features of this area were over his imagination. He pondered for a few seconds. Billions of starlight beams radiated from his body. They turned into a light curtain, or like a feather fan above Shiyan and Xia Xianyan. The shield created by the starlight had stopped the strange rain. However, it smoked as the star energy drained quickly. If we continue this way, you can endure for a long time without energy supplement. You're just merely using energy without a refill, said Xia Xianyan. Shiyan nodded. He knew she was right. Because they couldn't refill the consumed energy in this hour, their day of death was when their energy was all gone. Shiyan couldn't absorb the energy in this area. He had thought that no creature could take in the remnant of energy inside the chaotic space basin. But when he found Ziyao could do that, he understood that nothing was absolute. Shiyan believed that the one who was attacking them discreetly, the creature they didn't know yet, could gather the energy here for sure. If he fought that person here, he would lose eventually in a battle of attrition. We will have some solution, Shiyan comforted her calmly. He quieted down his mind and released his soul consciousness to sense and survey. He wanted to use the soul consciousness to check if he could find Ziyao in the clouds around here. After that, he would think about how to rescue her. After a while, he screamed, his face panic-stricken. He suddenly looked in a direction where two powerful experts were approaching. He knew both of them. DeCarlos and Lady. Why did they come here? What did they come here for? Chapter 1331. The Big Meatball. Chapter 1331. The Big Meatball, _. The starlight curtain above their heads could resist the fierce downpour. Shiyan put on a heaven countenance. He was surprised too. Xia Xianyan was sensitive enough to see the slightest change on his face and the screen. Did you find something? Someone is coming. Shiyan had an idea. He released his soul consciousness and revealed his life energy fluctuation. He wanted to know if DeCarlos and Lady came here on purpose. A wisp of soul consciousness flew out and flashed in the middle of the outer space streamers. He focused on observing. Indeed, they were heading here. Surprisingly, DeCarlos and Lady came to this area together. When Shiyan had released his soul consciousness, DeCarlos and Lady looked surprised. They exchanged looks and frowned. Then, they turned into two beams of lightning and crossed the distance immediately. In the next moment, Lady and DeCarlos had arrived by Shiyan and Xia Xianyan. When the 2-second sky of a mortal realm expert saw Shiyan, they had awkward expressions. Why are you here? DeCarlos asked as he couldn't make head or tail out of it. Shiyan had the same doubt. So why are you here? You're the one who gifted me that pure energy. At the same time, Xia Xianyan cried. Her beautiful eyes had a magical light. She looked at DeCarlos and cried. We don't know each other. Why did you pour that amount of pure energy on me? Because you're cultivating time power Upanishad. In this vast sea of stars, you're not the only expert cultivating this power, but you have the highest realm. DeCarlos looked at her, his voice tender and happy. It seems like the evil barrier in your heart is clear. Yeah, it's really good. Now, you can continue to break through and progress faster. I quite don't understand your idea. For the time being, you don't need to understand it. Your realm is still a little low. When the time comes and your realm becomes sufficient, I will tell you the reason. Why are you here? DeCarlo suddenly furrowed his brows and quieted down. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the clouds around and then Shuryen and Xia Xian. He asked, "How did you get here?" "Coincidence." Shuryen rubbed his forehead. Pondering for a while, he thought he should tell them the truth. Perhaps they could provide him with more precise information. Thus, he told them the situation. "A friend of mine came here unintentionally. I guess those clouds have captured her. I came here following her life energy fluctuations." "Those aren't clouds," said Lady all of a sudden. DeCarlos looked at him. "Are they related to the ones of your heavenly monster tribe?" Lady shook his head. Hesitating for a while, he turned to Shuryen. "You should ask him. I think he knows it better than I do." DeCarlos' eyes brightened. He didn't pretend to go around the bush. "Kid, do you feel anything familiar here? Did you sense the distinctive aura of the very first generation of heavenly monster tribe around here?" Shuryen observed the surroundings, including innumerable clouds and the strange downpour. He pried, "You mean there is some creature living around here?" Lady and DeCarlos nodded. "No, there's no aura of heavenly monster tribe's precursors. Otherwise, I would have sensed it before. When I was in Thunder Firmament Star area and saw the thunder wisps of a soul for the first time, I could feel the magical aura instantly." "I didn't have such a feeling here," Shuryen said. Listening to him, Lady and DeCarlos went stern. After a while, DeCarlos said in a low-pitched voice, "We were wrong. It's not one of Heavenly Monster Tribe's precursors." "So, what is it? Isn't it a creature from our universe? What are you guys talking about?" Shuryen sounded bewildered. DeCarlos looked at him and hesitated. "That thing always exists in this space basin. It has swallowed countless warriors who had fallen into this area accidentally. It's really bizarre. Its body seems to detach or divide into many pieces and scatter throughout the many death traps in this area. I've been living for so many years in the turbulent space basin. I've encountered its existence in many zones. It has a life consciousness. It can gather energy here. It can move, but it has never contacted any other creature." Talking about this strange creature, DeCarlos looked baffled and worried somehow. "If these aren't clouds, are they its body?" asked Xia Xian. It was unknown why DeCarlos didn't treat Shuryen with care. He sounded a little harsh, though. However, when he talked to Xia Xian, he was very gentle. He even paid attention to Xia Xian's question. "The clouds are just the cover. Let me show you its real form. Take a look." DeCarlos made the hand seal. His 10 fingertips joined and sharp blades shot out, attacking one dark cloud. The sharp blades were like pairs of scissors that peeled the dark cloud as if someone was peeling off a tangerine. The cloud was paired, releasing wisps of smoke. All of a sudden, an ugly thing emerged nakedly. That thing was a gray-brown chunk with many small dots like snot from a runny nose or some soft maggots. Somehow, it looked more like sarcomas or meat lumps. This gross thing could even move. After a glance, Xia Xian was filled with loathing. "So disgusting. This area has more than dozens of thousands of clouds. Each cloud has a thing like that keeps the warriors inside. They are the ones who have come here accidentally. Those things have captured them and killed them slowly. Those clouds are ugly meatballs or malicious tumors. Sometimes they gather, but most of the time, they stay separate like this." I want to tell you one more thing. There are many areas with the same clusters of clouds like this in the chaotic space currents. I've seen a lot. However, with my cultivation base, I can't survey the ends of the current. I guess there will be more of these in the deeper and further area, DeCarlos explained. Shuryen and Xia Xian were frightened. They were baffled and they couldn't say anything. This infinite chaotic space basin had many areas with this sort of creature that was like malignant tumors. No one knew how long they had been there and how many warriors of many eras they had swallowed. DeCarlos didn't know if it had a high intellect or not. It was because he had never talked to it. However, DeCarlos had a vague feeling that it did have intelligence and a complete consciousness. Thus, he thought the reason why it didn't want to communicate with him was that it disdained him. I have an absurd feeling. I feel like it disdains to talk to us because it assumes that we don't deserve it. It's like we don't talk to a bug because we're a high-level creature and a bug is just a lowly insect. There's a distance we can't cover, added DeCarlos. Absurd. Really absurd. I'm sure you're wrong. Even Lady couldn't stand it. He shook his head continuously, doubting DeCarlos's feeling. Except for you, who knows about its existence? Asked Shiryen. DeCarlos snorted. I don't know. As far as I know, no one else knows about it and is still alive. Xianhe, Frederick, and Tianxia have profound realms, but their territories are somewhere else. They are restricted a lot in the space basin. They can't stay here for a long time. So why are you here? What's your purpose? Shiryen asked again. He thinks it's a hidden danger. We can't talk to it, so we decided to destroy it. We will destroy each of the gathering spots he's found. We don't want to leave any seed of potential dangers. Different from his friend, Lady explained to Shiryen calmly and gently. Shiryen had revived him and Shiryen had the origin of his homeland. From deep in his soul, he felt close to Shiryen instinctively. It was the soul streak that existed in his soul since he was born. He could never erase it. Destroy it here? Shiryen grinned. Good thought. I have the same idea. It seems like we have the same voice here. You've tried, DeCarlos frowned, his face severe. Although your realm's not high, you have the origin of the ancient continent. You have the heaven flames. I heard that heaven flames can refine any kind of creature. You've tried, but you didn't succeed. Lady's face darkened. Is it really hard to destroy this thing? Perhaps it's because I haven't fused with my heaven flame utterly. But it's really peculiar, indeed, nodded Shiryen. DeCarlos wore a stern face, his line of sight raking around. After a while, he talked to Shiryen. Today, your bloodthirsty force and the God Clan are in furious war. You ignore your business and come here for what? Lady and I will solve the problem here. You should leave soon. Don't waste Xianhe and Minghao's appreciation for you. A friend of mine has gone missing, Shiryen snorted. Because of a girl, haha. Kid, you have my style from before. Lady laughed and grumblingly shook the entire void. He cocked his head, looking at Xia Xian and grinning. You got two beautiful ladies at the same time. Bold. Both Lady and Azure Dragon had the lustful blood of the Dragon Clan. Rumors said that the two ancestors of Heavenly Monster Tribe Lady and Qing Xiao had turned their backs to each other because of women. Moreover, Elder Spark of the God Clan just died. Fiery Rain Star Area won the first victory. Of course, Xianhe, Minghao, and Frederick have managed all the details of the bigger battles. I don't need to worry a lot, said Shiryen indifferently. He knew his capacity. Before he had reached the immortal realm to be finally equal to Quan He and Minghao, the newly elected master of the bloodthirsty force was just a puppet. He could step on this throne because Xianhe, Minghao, and Frederick thought that it would be easier and more legal for him to have the voice as the master. Unless Xianhe, Minghao, and Frederick didn't mind Bloodthirsty's rules, they couldn't call all the warriors cultivating the 8 power Upanishads to launch the war against the God Clan. If you insist on staying, I will tell you more things. It's true that you can help us a little more. DeCarlos pondered for a while and then nodded. Shiryen's eyes brightened. Chapter 1332. Refine. Chapter 1332. Refine, _. Actually, I've paid attention to it for a long time. I've secretly watched its moves. However, it recently became rebellious. As it captured more warriors, perhaps it's like a wounded warrior getting healed. DeCarlos explained with a grave face. Recently, the space passages in the sea territory of many star areas often encounter problems. Many warriors have gone missing inexplicably while moving through the space passages. Furthermore, many people who were using the space teleport formation I've built have also gone missing. He looked at Xia Xian and Shiryen, his face heavier. I didn't have a clue until I found a missing warrior in a cloud near here. DeCarlos pointed at the dark clouds around and spoke with a cold countenance. Those gone missing warriors were dragged here to this chaotic space basin. It has confined them. Shi Yan and Xia Xen Yan were shaken. They couldn't believe it, and they felt so cold inwardly. If that thing could affect space passages and pull traveling warriors to the space basin, the transport between the star areas was going to be much more dangerous later on. DeCarlos was the warrior with the best space power Upanishad in the world. He had built many space teleport formations for Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. When those formations were ineffective and many warriors had disappeared mysteriously while using the formations, it was going to create a terrible influence on his reputation. He had to make it clear. If it happened that way, people would be afraid of traveling through space passages. It would affect the universe a lot. It's not that simple. DeCarlos rubbed his long, white beard. He looked at the dark clouds hovering nearby and said with a little fear, "It seems to affect the barrier of the sky too. You know that the normal warriors can't shatter the void with their attacks. But now, when Third Sky of Incipient God Realm experts fight, they can make the void shatter or break. They can possibly make the entire star area collapse." Shi Yan was surprised. He suddenly remembered the time he fought with Spark when his blood sword had hit the other's celestial ice jade flake, which had created a space that shattered. At that time, he suddenly had a feeling that the void seemed so vulnerable. It was too fragile. When the void collapsed that time, around 10,000 God Clan's warriors had been dragged into the space basin. He knew that they couldn't survive. Connecting this to what DeCarlos had just told him, Shi Yan grimaced. He got a very bad premonition. Could it be that someone had done something discreetly to take that horde of God Clansmen to confine them like Spark? I took Lady here because I found that the sea territory has become even stranger. Recently, it seems to have much more energy, continued DeCarlos. Shi Yan rubbed his nose, feeling embarrassed. When I fought Spark, we had exploded the void of Fiery Rain Star area. Around 10,000 warriors of the God Clan had been dragged into this area. I wonder if that sudden boost of energy is related to the God Clan's warriors and Spark. Hearing him, Lady was bewildered. DeCarlos changed his face and thundered, "I couldn't believe it was because of you. Don't be feverish. Don't. I'm here to find the solution, aren't I?" Shi Yan smiled sheepishly. "DeCarlos, don't forget why we're here. It's more important to do the main business." Lady comforted him. "This kid is our Heavenly Monster tribe's lucky star. If you kill him, our tribe won't thrive again." "Harumph, I don't dare to kill him. Anyway." DeCarlos's face was glum as if his parents had just passed away. "He's a bad omen and a malignant tumor of this sea of stars. If he dies, this universe will be in peace. But now, no one wants to live in peace in this universe. I don't want to cause any grudge against Tianxia, Minghao, or Xianhe. Focus." Lady stressed it again. DeCarlos calmed down eventually. "Right, focus on the business. I will peel off the dark things outside the meatball. You will use rough lightning to strike it, then we let the kid use the heaven flame to burn it down. Let's see if we can destroy it." He soon had a plan. "I think it's not gonna be trouble." Lady laughed roughly and winked at Shi Yan. "Do you have any problem?" "Not at all," Shi Yan shrugged. DeCarlos didn't linger. He took action directly and released his power. In this strange area, he made hand seals and skillfully drew the power of space. His body glowed and flashed continuously like a sparkling crystal. It happened like that for several seconds. Abruptly, billions of sharp blades bloomed like a storm. They scattered and slashed on those black clouds. Just like miracle sabers, they flew around and peeled off the outer layer of the black clouds. The disgusting meat lumps were revealed like massive tumors hanging in the sky and filling the area. There were more than 10,000 of them. Vaguely, they had formed a strange, unknown array. Those meatballs had a viscous substance like the nasal mucus. They swelled and moved closer to each other. Just like cells that were magnified billions of times, they gathered and made goosebumps rise on their skin. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Suddenly, lightning strikes came with the bellowing thunder. Billions of lightning snakes flew out of Lady's incipient extent and attacked those massive balls. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Innumerable meatballs began to fume gray smoke. They swelled and diffused more sticky fluid. There were so many warriors confined inside the meatballs. The blood veins and intestines acted like the tentacles that moved agilely toward Shiryan's team. Those things were sticky and disgusting with a sort of gross, yellow pus that was dripping. It was so nauseating indeed. At the same time, an evil thought aimed at them. Lady, could you feel that? DeCarlos suddenly screamed. Is that the consciousness a low-level creature could have? Lady winced. He knitted his brows to focus on sensing. Then, he said, you're right. It looks down on us and doesn't talk to us because it assumes that it's a high-level being and we're just little ants. Yeah, that feeling. As Shiryan and Xia Xian had relatively low realms, they couldn't feel the subtle features that Lady and DeCarlos could feel. They looked surprised as they were trying to sense too. Send out your heaven flame. Use the best power to burn down this area, shouted DeCarlos. He hadn't finished, and the eternal fires hovering around Shiryan had already expanded like fire burning the dry moor. With one breath, the scorching flames of the origin had rolled fierily. Billions of flames shot toward the meatballs like lightning strikes. Boom, boom. The meat lumps caught on fire and started burning. At first, DeCarlos had peeled off the thickest defense of it. Then, Lady used his magnificent lightning to bombard it, and in the end, the heaven flames of the origin burned it. The three experts had joined hands, and they seemed to find the right way to destroy those gross things. Innumerable meat lumps were covered in heaven flame, burning fiercely. It seems that it's not really hard, Lady grinned and continued harshly. We don't need to care what the heck it is. Just burn it down. Let's see what it can do. DeCarlos agreed with him. Because of the fiery power of Shiryan's heaven flames that could burn all kinds of creatures, he began to treat Shiryan better. Looking at the vehement flame expanding, he said, here's just one spot. Only the spots I know. There are around 10. We should keep going. I want to find my friend, frowned Shiryan. The one you're searching for shouldn't be here. Otherwise, you won't burn them that easily. Before we came here, you must have investigated the area. DeCarlos looked impatient. First, for the safety of many star areas, we should head on to the main business. Perhaps the one who you're looking for is confined by the same thing but in another area. We should just check one by one then. It won't take much time anyway. Hey, what's that? Screamed Lady. DeCarlos and Shiryan looked at that area. It was the meatball that kept spark. It was burned, but it didn't look like ashes. Quite the contrary, a cold energy was emitting from it. The cold energy created a blue mist then diffused. Shiryan's heaven flame was extinguished everywhere it went by. It's Spark's life treasure. It's strange. He said that it was called Celestial Ice Jade Flake. He got it from the sea domain of Nihility, and he had to use 700 years to tame it. It's really powerful, though. Shiryan screamed as he saw the icy halo inside the meat lump. Something from the sea domain of Nihility. DeCarlos looked tense. It can endure your heaven flame without reducing the cold energy, and it can use the mist to extinguish your premature heaven flame. This item is absolutely a magical treasure. Lady's eyes brightened. However, his interest was gone almost instantly, shaking his head. Nah, it's not suitable for my power Upanishad. Xiao. Right at this moment, Xia Xian couldn't help but scream and point at something. Inside the sea of surging fire, a massive meatball was like a brain cracking. Xiao emerged. Her eyes were blank without a gleam of emotion. She rose one hand and grabbed the void. The celestial ice jade flake turned into a cold light and fell into her white hand. A tremendous energy fluctuated from her body. Unexpectedly, it wasn't weaker than DeCarlos and Lady. When Xiao had many bright-colored halos ripple behind her, they expanded like light consonances. Her entire body immersed in the bright, divine light and gave people a fantasy, dreamy feeling. However, the aura on her body made people quiver in fear. It was a coldness that no human being should have. Chapter 1333, Gigantic Worm. Chapter 1333, Gigantic Worm, _ The way Xiao appeared was so bizarre. She emerged from inside a torn chunk of meat, divine light twirling around her. A set of gray armor covered her beautiful body that looked like shells of some strange insect. The armor had many cracks-like patterns with a mysterious energy. Layers of bright-colored halos beautified her, but her face was so cold. She grabbed something in the void and retrieved the celestial ice jade flake. Right after that, a cold energy expanded unceasingly in this area. The heaven flames Shurians released were extinguished as soon as that kind of cold energy reached them. The deep-to-bone coldness was like ice water pouring into people's sea of consciousness. Shurian shuddered. His face changed when he shouted her name. Ziyao. He focused on Ziyao. A beam of light that was a wisp of his soul shot out of his eyes. Shurian wasn't dull. At first glance, he knew that Ziyao was possessed and, of course, the thing that had occupied her soul altar and sea of consciousness was that unknown, evil thing. He used the soul attack to wake up Ziyao's soul. His wisp of soul didn't meet any obstacle. It got into Ziyao's brain easily and magically. Abruptly, the chilly feeling of entering a glacier shot back into Shurian's soul. He couldn't help but shiver. Checking his condition, he was scared in seeing his soul atlas frosting. Ziyao's finger like the scallion flickered. The celestial ice jade flake shot out a cold, energy that seemed to have activated some magical formation. When that cold energy emerged, strange PTFF sounds echoed from countless massive meat lumps around. People then saw the swaying meatballs act faster. They began to devour each other. After a short course of dozens of seconds, a gigantic creature was built in front of Shurian's group. That thing was some sort of a worm that they had never seen before. Its entire body was white-gray with countless, disgusting lumps like toad skin. As it had just been formed, the worm didn't have eyes yet. However, its shape was as massive as a life star, and it was dozens of times larger than Lady's monster form. After the nauseating, spectacular worm congregated, a chain of muffled murmuring came from inside its body. It was strange, as if it was communication between different souls. It was so evil and bizarre. Ziyao was standing on that massive worm. She looked just as big as a speck of dust compared to the worm. The celestial ice jade flake on her hand sparkled and released cold energy, trying to freeze the entire place. During this process, DeCarlos and Lady didn't move. Their eyes were bright as they observed the alien. They looked astounded, indeed. Xia Xianyan's exquisite face had a gleam of fear. She looked at Ziyao. Similar to what Shurian did, she released her soul consciousness to communicate. The wisps of cold aura like icy fibers attacked her graceful body. Immediately, she had a layer of twinkling frost on her body. She was frightened. Blood trickled down the corners of her mouth. As soon as it emerged, her blood was frozen. It looked bizarre on her face indeed. Swoosh! A tangerine flame came on time and ran one lap around her body. The cold aura on her body was washed away. "Are you all right?" Shurian appeared by her. Holding her hand, he released a current of warm energy to her body. "She's possessed." Xia Xianyan slightly shook her head. The blood ice on her pink lips melted. She used a white handkerchief to wipe it. She sounded worried. "We have never seen this thing before. You should be careful. You must retain a bit of energy just in case." "Those two. They're not from our side." Shurian nodded. "We're correct. That thing has life and intelligence. It's a high-level living being. It's proven as it could possess that little girl's soul. It's a big surprise to see such a massive worm in this vast, mysterious universe." Apparently, DeCarlos didn't consider Ziyao's situation. He looked at the peculiar worm and gave compliments. His white hair moved without the wind. The space energy rippled through his body. It looked like he had urged the ultimate space power Upanishad instantly. Lady didn't answer. Thunder rumbled in his body and shook the entire place as if it wanted to shatter this void here. Lady didn't hesitate and turned into his real monster body in the earth-shattering thunder. A brutal silver dragon emerged in the sky filled with lightning beams. His aura of the primal, immemorial beast swarmed over. Anyway, although his thunder dragon body wasn't small, it was still comparably tiny. It was like a man standing by a massive mountain. DeCarlos, that thing is really frightening. My instinct tells me that I hate it and I feel insecure. Lady's serious voice thundered from the dragon's mouth. Altogether, the lightning balls as big as a windmill flew out from his mouth. The crystal lightning balls gathered the dazzling electric strikes and dashed toward that freaky worm. He had used his best powers. DeCarlos discolored. He was also shaken. He rarely saw Lady in that grave countenance. Lady was showing that he was facing the strongest enemy. He knew that Lady, the ancestor of Heavenly Monster Tribe, could somehow know the level of the alien enemy. It was his instinct. From Lady's performance, he apparently considered that worm his most powerful enemy. He was trying his best. DeCarlos could feel something wrong. He contemplated for a few seconds and then said, "My advice to you guys. You should leave now. Otherwise, at the critical moment, I'm afraid that we can't take care of you. I'm connected to Grace Mainland. With only a thought, I can use the space door to escape. You don't need to worry about me," said Shiryen. DeCarlos frowned and looked at Xia Xianyan. He sighed inwardly but said nothing. His body suddenly quivered and sent his massive spatial energy towards the gigantic worm. Roar! Roar! Lady roared and spurted countless spinning lightning balls. Each lightning ball was enough to destroy the mountains, rivers, and even the sea. It carried the power of the expert at second sky of Immortal Realm. Several thousand lightning balls came out unceasingly from Lady's mouth and bombarded that bizarre worm. The earth-shaking lightning balls created big holes with sticky pus. However, those massive holes just twitched and closed. They were healed almost instantly. Its self-recovery ability was so terrifying. After the meatballs congregated, they had become much more terrifying. When Lady began to attack the worm, Xiao suddenly got into the meatball and disappeared. The aura on that giant worm increased further. People felt even colder. Shiryen was chilled. He lowered his voice. "Remember, don't come near that worm." Shiryen had an inexplicable, unknown feeling. He thought that the worm didn't move and just let Lady and DeCarlos attack it because it hadn't finished the fusion yet. It was adjusting its structure. It was like a sleeping person whose body went numb and needed time to get a grip when he or she got up. Shiryen had this feeling. Shiryen was extremely insecure. Together with that, he caught a feint of something familiar. It seemed like he knew what this worm was. This feeling didn't come from his host soul, but the co-soul in Grace Mainland. His co-soul was Grace Mainland, the life and consciousness of the planet that which had experienced countless years. No one knew how long it had existed, but surely it had been there much longer than the four great creatures. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. All of a sudden, the disasters in this area were revived. They all swarmed over. Explosions occurred everywhere. The deadly storm came with icy, twisting energy, and even the drops with tremendous piercing power. The terrifying dangers came and were aimed at DeCarlos and Lady. The streamers everywhere towered the entire space and swarmed over them like a shower of meteors. The eccentric worm wiggled its massive body. It seemed to finally wake up after a long slumber. When it moved, the meat lumps on its body fumed the black smoke that then gathered like a terrifying evil soul. That dark soul was so cold, wiggling and snatching over Lady. Lady roared and thundered, continuously releasing more lightning strikes. The entire sky was connected with lightning and electric beams. Countless lightning bolts as big as an arm crawled thickly. This commotion had energy that was able to shatter people's minds. DeCarlos also looked heavy. He had used his strongest attack and sent countless spaces like big nets over the giant worm. He wanted to confine the worm in his space energy. Shiryen saw the worm being covered inside dozens of spaces that then connected and strengthened each other. It was like someone being confined inside a steel cage. Then, they used another bigger steel cage to cover that cage, and it went on to so many layers. However, the big worm was still moving as if nothing had happened. Shiryen could see the worm getting angry through dozens of clear space confinements. It was like an enraged beast. Then, he saw DeCarlos's pale, blood trickling down the corner of his eyes. The worm only wiggled and it could hurt DeCarlos severely. It had damaged the soul of this expert at second sky of Immortal Realm. Only DeCarlos knew that many layers of space confinements that he had placed on the worm were shattering rapidly. Every time one of them broke, it felt like a dagger was stabbing his brain. It was so painful that he couldn't help it. What is this thing after all? DeCarlos shouted. He tried to think while blood oozed out of the 7 holes on his face. He was shocked when he thought of a possibility. Would it be that thing? DeCarlos changed his face, his eyes so frightened. Seconds later, he screamed. Lady, we can't counter this. I'm taking you out of here. Chapter 1334, Creatures of the Absolute Beginning. Chapter 1334, Creatures of the Absolute Beginning, _ DeCarlos shouted and hurried toward Lady. He wanted to leave immediately. He had even ignored the layers of space confining the massive worm. DeCarlos, what the heck is that? Lady shook his dragon's head. The dim lightning bolts shot out of his silver body and swarmed toward the worm. Don't waste your energy. We can't deal with it. DeCarlos was still bleeding. He looked helter-skelter and he forced a smile. At the same time, Shurian's countenance changed. He looked extremely panic-stricken. The ring spirit Ming Hao had restricted was screaming inside the blood vein ring as it had just received an unknown force. His soul moved into the blood vein ring. He then found so many complex barriers and restrictions inside the blood vein ring. Those barriers layered and shrouded a gray soul. That gray soul should be the ring spirit. When the layers of complicated barriers were like mirrors with so many cracks, the ring spirit's aura inside the seal became fiercer. This ring spirit wasn't the original one. Xian Shan had used the origin of ancient god continent to guide it here. It would be a soul from another universe like Shurian. It had swallowed the genuine ring spirit and schemed to take his soul. Later on, its ambition grew bigger as it wanted to collect bloodthirsty's remains to resurrect itself. Ming Hao had used his supernatural power to seal that thing inside the ring. However, under some special circumstances, it could contact Shurian. However, the restriction Ming Hao had created was torn now. The ring spirit was wiggling to get rid of it. DeCarlos was screaming as he couldn't resist the giant worm. Shurian became more restless. He knew that it wouldn't turn out well at all. He pondered for a few seconds and then rose one hand, creating a magical vortex by him. You should return to Grace Mainland first. He rose his hand and sent a tender force at Xia Xianyan, pushing her into the vortex. He didn't give her time to prepare. At the same time, he touched his glabella. His host's soul emerged from his forehead. The blood mark on the host soul's forehead radiated a beam of strange blood light. It was like a signal sent to a mysterious, unknown place. A blood light descended from the sky and fell to the devouring island in the center in the Blood Sea, bloodthirsty forces forbidden land. A message came out like a furious current. Xian He and Frederick immediately found it. They changed their face and immediately took action. Shortly afterward, swoosh, a strange light appeared by Shurian. Then, a dark soul emerged and turned into a soul clone of Ming Hao. After 2 flashes, Xian He and Frederick appeared, their faces grave. As long as Ming Hao arrived, he saw DeCarlos bleeding and ready to take Lady away in fear. Ming Hao was bewildered. He muttered, "Brother." DeCarlos halted for a moment. He turned to look at him and shouted, "I don't have an excellent brother like you." DeCarlos. Lady thundered, his dragon body struggling. "What are you afraid of?" Xian He and Frederick looked at Shurian, or the blood vein ring on his finger to be exact. Xian He said, "Is that ring spirit about to get rid of the seal?" Shurian nodded and said to Ming Hao, "The seal you've set up was well made. However, it suddenly shakes a lot now." Ming Hao wore a dark face, snatched the blood vein ring, and sent a wisp of his soul into it. His face changed immediately, and he looked at the giant worm. He closed his eyes as if he was considering something. Then, he opened his eyes, looked at DeCarlos, and said, "Brother, is it the thing Master used to tell us?" This time, DeCarlos didn't shout at him. He nodded with a bitter face. "It should be." Xian He, Frederick didn't get it. They looked at Ming Hao and DeCarlos, trying to guess what they had mentioned. Ming Hao grimaced as DeCarlos confirmed it. He said in a low-pitched and stern voice, "That thing is trying to affect the ring spirit." It seems to help the ring's spirit to escape. People were bewildered listening to him. Minghao frowned. Don't look at me. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the relationship between that evil thing and the ring's spirit. What's that? Asked Xianhe. While they were talking, the massive worm was struggling hard to get rid of DeCarlos's layers of spatial confinement. Its planet-like body convulsed, but its aura was blocked. Only DeCarlos could perceive it, so only he had to endure it. DeCarlos shook as if he got hit hard in his chest. His ashen face had more cuts. He suddenly screamed, "My genuine space seal can't hold it longer. I want to dismiss the barriers. Guys, get ready." What's that thing? Xianhe and Frederick looked at Minghao and shouted at the same time. A creature from the absolute beginning, answered Minghao. Xianhe, Frederick, Lei Di, and Shiyan were perplexed. Apparently, they had never heard about this before. Netherworld lock armor. Minghao hadn't explained it to them yet. With a grim face, he drew the dark souls out of his eyes. Shortly after, hundreds of thousands of spirits bobbed like an entire sea, moving towards DeCarlos's space confinement. Together, they had magically improved the genuine space confinement. Surprisingly, most of the spirits were at original God Realm or ethereal God Realm. They had even seen incipient God Realm souls. No one knew how many brutal karmas Minghao had created throughout these years to gather this horde of souls. Innumerable souls created a chain armor that covered the space barriers and strengthened DeCarlos's seal. DeCarlos's grimaced face became a little better when the souls supported his seal. He took a deep breath to recover and then said, "With the three of you here, we can confine this immemorial creature. Anyway, I'm sure we can't destroy it, and we don't know how long we can keep it here." Shiyan dropped his jaw. After Minghao, Xianhe, and Frederick came here, they had 5 experts at second sky of Immortal Realm. This force was enough to clear any other force in this universe, except for the God Clan's force. However, this force was only enough to confine that thing here, and DeCarlos said that they couldn't do that for a long time. What was going on here? More strangely, Minghao agreed with his assumption. He said, "Brother, you're correct. We can only hold it here for dozens of years. It's almost impossible to kill it." What's that after all? Lei Di turned into a massive lightning beam. After a flash, he turned into his humanoid form, his face impatient and restless. Heavenly Monster Tribe, Immortal Demon Clan, Imperial Dark Tribe, and God Clan have a history of only 100,000 years. The earliest time recorded in your history is 100,000 years ago. DeCarlos looked at Lei Di and said begrudgingly. However, there's an era called the Absolute Beginning before that. There were creatures in that era, and moreover, they were beyond our knowledge. They were the creatures from the Absolute Beginning. Shiyan and the others were stunned. Although my teacher was killed by Bloodthirsty, he was still the warrior with the best space power Upanishad in this world. He had never stopped exploring space. He knew many marvelous and old secrets in this world. He had told us the stories of the Absolute Beginning era. DeCarlos frowned. The creatures in that era were very, very powerful. They said that at the beginning, this universe was hundreds of thousands of times bigger than the present one. The star areas were like drops in the sea. My teacher said that because of the competition between the creatures of the Absolute Beginning, it shrunk to the current size of the cosmos. The creatures living in that era were much more giant than the members of Heavenly Monster Tribe. Also, they were spectacular indeed. Their bodies could look like a mountain or even a sea. Sometimes, a planet can be a creature from that era. They were so massive and their life almost didn't have an end. They knew the original power of the universe. Their competencies were something we could never imagine. So, from what you've said, what's desolate? Intervened Shiyan. Good guess. Desolate is a creature from the Absolute Beginning era. Minghao looked at him. Shiyan was stunned as if his soul got hit. I can even tell you something. Grace Mainland, Ancient God Continent, Ancient Demon Continent, and God-blessed Mainland used to be parts of Desolate. It's like a person who has a head and 4 limbs. Desolate is the he, and the other continents are its limbs. They used to be one, but they got hurt. Something we could never imagine had cut them and separated them like that, snorted DeCarlos. This time, Even Xianhe, Frederick, and Lei looked frightened. Xianhe looked at Minghao. He was so confused. After he pulled himself together, he turned to ask Minghao, "Did he tell the truth?" Minghao kept silent for a while before speaking. "I don't know if it's true or not. These things are what my teacher had concluded a long time ago. I've been trying to prove them in the past 10,000 years. I don't dare to confirm anything, but I know it's the closest to the truth. At least, we all know that Desolate has its own consciousness. Because it got terribly hurt, it has turned eccentric like that. Desolate is an absolute beginning creature, and so is that thing. None of us have ever fought or talked to them. However, my teacher told us that the absolute beginning creatures were invincible and only the other absolute beginning creatures could counter it," DeCarlo said sternly. "True then," Shiryen spoke again. "Another soul of mine gave me a familiar feeling about that thing. It seems to recognize it." Instantly, everybody turned to focus on him. Minghao looked a little touched as he said, "We've almost forgotten that you had Grace Mainland's origin. If my teacher assumed correctly, as you fused with Grace Mainland, you have a wisp of Desolate's detached soul. It's not strange that you have a familiar feeling about them." Pondering for a while, he turned to DeCarlos. "Brother, you said that nobody had actually fought or talked with the creatures from the absolute beginning era. You're wrong. Someone did, and he even managed to win." "Who?" DeCarlos was astounded. "My former master." Chapter 1335, Living in the Sheep Pasture. Chapter 1335, Living in the Sheep Pasture, _ Minghao's former master was bloodthirsty, obviously. He was the most difficult riddle in the vast sea of star in the past dozens of thousands of years. He was also the strongest warrior that people had acknowledged. DeCarlos and Lei changed their countenances slightly. Even Xianhe and Frederick were baffled. They asked bewilderedly, "How come we never knew this? So then why I'm the leader of the cortege of 8 and not you two?" Minghao threw them a glance and said deliberately. Xianhe and Frederick snorted at the same time. "Is it true that Bloodthirsty used to fight the creature from the absolute beginning?" He won." DeCarlos was so astounded. Minghao nodded, talking. "It's true. The mysterious power he got also comes from that victory. I guess he got it from the absolute beginning creature he had defeated." People looked horror-struck. Shiryen also discolored in fear. He felt shocked. Rumor said that only Bloodthirsty understood and used that kind of anonymous energy. After 10,000 years, the leading forces like the God Clan, the Thousand Fantasy Sect, the Broken Hall, and the Heaven River Temple had kept Bloodthirsty's remains to decode the mystery of that energy. However, until now, no one had figured out how to use that energy. Shiryen knew that this kind of power was absolutely dangerous. It was perhaps the core power that helped Bloodthirsty rule the world. To get this power, the God Clan had united the big forces to kill Bloodthirsty. Anyway, they hadn't made any progress in explaining the nature of that power. Until now, no one knew where Bloodthirsty came from or where he got the Devouring and the other 8 great power Upanishads. Before Bloodthirsty, the Devouring and the 8 great power Upanishad hadn't existed in this cosmos. Bloodthirsty's existence had spread out the great powers. However, what had actually frightened the strongest experts was another power that Bloodthirsty controlled. It was even more mysterious to find the origin of that power. Listening to Minghao, everybody was perplexed because it was inexplicable to them. People who knew Minghao knew that he would never talk nonsense. Normally, his conclusion was the result of many years of observing and thorough investigations. If he said something, it was the closest to the truth. Unexpectedly, that kind of energy came from some absolute beginning creature. Lei DeCarlos, Xianhe, and Minghao had the dazzling light shoot out of their eyes when they looked at the massive worm. It seemed like they were stirred up. However, shortly after, they discolored in fear. The giant worm under layers of barriers began to struggle hard one more time. While it was wiggling, it murmured something. It was some sort of soul language that had never existed in this universe. Its voice whined and sounded archaic. Amazingly, it could get through Minghao and DeCarlo seals to expand the world outside. It was like using the soul to summon something. Tui. DeCarlos couldn't help but spurt blood. He looked paler as he screamed in fear. It's calling for more of its kind. Minghao in the soul form twisted as if he also got hurt. He cried, Xianhe, Frederick. Seal it now. Okay. Xianhe and Frederick nodded resolutely, their eyes slightly excited. They urged their power immediately. An immense blood sea overflowed from Xianhe's incipient extent that was vast and thick with the isolated, deadly aura. However, inside the sea, the life energy burst up vigorously. The sea acted as a blood membrane and covered the giant worm. Frederick grinned strangely. The pale white wisps of core chi condensed and expanded like a thick white smog. Inside the curtain of smog was the glimpse of millions of white gravestones. They looked like the cold, silent mountains of the demons and ghosts after tens of thousands of years. The white gravestones inside the white smog were made of the corpse chi arrayed in the ancient formation that could destroy the world. Millions of tombstone were planted in the cold and deadly mist. They pressed down on the worm and tried to confine it. At the same time, Lady thundered his dragon roar. He opened his mouth and spurted dozens of thousands of small thunder dragons made of lightning and electric beams. They were like fierce lightning ropes tying the worm. DeCarlos, Minghao, Xianhe, Frederick, and Lady were the 5 existences at the immortal realm. No one could resist this force in this world. If they had struck a star area, it would be enough to destroy it instantly, killing countless life stars and creatures. Under the fierce attack of such force, Shuryen was affected as he had only second sky of incipient god realm cultivation base. He stood aside and watched. He felt frightened as if his soul altar could be shattered in any minute by the shockwaves. Almost instantly, he had turned into the immortal demon body. The shield became his armor. Shuryen had to gather the god power in his body to create layers of protection. He looked like a bloody rock that could resist all kind of shockwaves. He pulled himself together to look at the massive worm. He felt so insecure as if something went wrong. The chaotic space basin didn't have borders or limits. It was infinite indeed. Then, something strange happened in the area pretty far from where Shuryen and the others were. Deep inside a space current was a place packed with countless dark clouds with disgusting meatballs inside. While the gigantic worm was murmuring, millions of dark clouds here began to move and gathered. Shortly afterward, they became a massive worm as big as an entire planet. The same change happened not only in that area. Just like that, there were 10 more colossal worms that appeared in the chaotic space basin. They were also gigantic. The 12 giant worms with similar size filled different areas of the space current. While DeCarlos, Lady, Minghao, and the others were attacking one of them, the other 11 hissed angrily. Their voices became high, shrieking as if they were outraged. The surface of each worm in the other areas began to ripple. The ripples were like waves of magical space energy. The outer space divine light shot out of their body. They gathered and made a magical, bright-colored bridge. Right then, 11 massive worms wiggled and entered the bridge and disappeared. Ancient God Continent. Inside the God Zenith, God Lord who had occupied Hig's body was hovering in the middle of a sea of essence chi and flesh. Countless corpses from different races bobbed in that sea. They could see the warriors of the human clan, monster clan, demon clan, dark spirit clan, ice clan, and so many others in that sea. Most of them had at least original god realm cultivation base when they were still alive. There were more than millions of corpses packed in the place. All of them looked ash-gray as if they didn't have a beam of life in them. The God Lord hovered above the sea. The pores in his entire body opened to suck the surging essence chi and energy from the bodies. He was recovering his energy at the quickest speed. All of a sudden, his closed eyes opened. The sun, moon, and stars moved inside his eyes radiantly. Master, Heavenly King Light kneeled by him and lifted up his face to watch his lord. Why do you wake up all of a sudden? The God Lord looked cold. He threw the other a glance and then said casually, summon carefree, divine martial, and easygoing. Ask them to come here at the fastest speed. Something earth-shaking is about to happen. Heavenly King Light didn't ask further. He immediately used his soul to send his message to every corner of ancient God's star area. In a corner of ancient God's star area on a freezing lunar star, Carefree was holding the moon nucleus in his hand. He was about to teach Ouyang Luo Shuang. But he suddenly shook and said to her, "You cultivate here alone. I have to go now. I have something very important to do." On a life star of the Brahmos family and inside a typical city, there was a stunningly handsome man sitting with two beautiful ladies with vulgar clothes on his chest. As he was having fun, a light flashed in his eyes. In the next moment, he disappeared into thin as if he had never been there. The current chief of the Charteris family, Charlant, was in a secret chamber together with some elders. They were listening to a handsome man's teaching about the marvelous features of power Upanishads and how to break through to the immortal realm. That man had a cold face like ice, his aura as sharp as a blade. Suddenly, he was startled, lowering his voice. "Master called me." He disappeared even before his voice had vanished, leaving a group of panic-stricken members of Charteris family in the secret chamber. They didn't know what happened. Carefree, easygoing, and divine martial, the three heavenly kings had dropped all of their work when they received Light's call. They were heading to ancient God continent at max speed. Just like three shooting lights in the middle of the universe, they could cross billions of miles and pass the sparkling stars after a breath. Shortly after, the three heavenly kings landed on ancient God continent inside the God Zenith. They kneeled down in front of the God Lord. They kept their heads lower and didn't ask a question. Just like the most loyal servants, they were waiting for their master's orders. 100,000 years ago, we had joined many experts to kill Bloodthirsty. We succeeded. Before he died, Bloodthirsty talked to me privately. "What he told me has bothered me for so many years, and I will never forget it," said the God Lord indifferently, his eyes rippling with many inexplicable waves of energy. The four heavenly kings slightly lifted up their heads and looked at him suspiciously, waiting for his further explanations. We all know that at ethereal God realm, the soul altar has the ethereal extent. After the warrior has entered incipient God realm, the ethereal extent will evolve to the incipient extent. The incipient extent is an independent space that can contain mountains or rivers. The most refined and advanced ones can even have planets. After reaching the immortal realm, the incipient extent will be developed one more time. It won't be different from the real world at that time. Even if we die, our incipient extent can remain independently. I heard that after the immortal realm, the incipient extent still could develop further. At that time, it could produce lives. The God Lord looked at the four and said, "Real lives. Living beings. The high-level living beings like us could be produced in an incipient extent of someone whose realm is higher than immortal realm." The four heavenly kings looked baffled. The God Lord intendedly paused for a while. He suddenly had a bitter gleam flashing on his face. "Have you ever thought that our God clan, Heavenly Monster Tribe, Imperial Dark Tribe, and Immortal Demon Tribe are living in someone's incipient extent?" Before he died, Bloodthirsty told me that I'm pathetic. I'm just a sheep in someone's pasture. The only thing that makes us different from the others is that we have a good shape with better vision. However, we are still the sheep. In nature, we're no different from the others. Chapter 1336, The Unsolved Riddle. Chapter 1336, The Unsolved Riddle, _. The four heavenly kings were baffled listening to the God Lord. They felt like their souls were baptized unknowingly by a fiery flood. "Master, you meant, the star area where we've ruled for 10,000 years and the universe we live are only things from someone's incipient extent? Like our incipient extent?" Carefree looked perplexed and absent-minded. He had lived for 10,000 years, but now he was suddenly downcast. Carefree, divine martial, and Light looked dumbstruck. The four heavenly kings were at the same position with the cortege of 8. In this vast sea of stars, each of them was a miracle and an undying legend. Their existences could be considered eternal. However, at this moment, all of them were too shocked they had even felt hurt. "Yeah, like that," the God Lord sounded indifferent. "I've been thinking about Bloodthirsty's last words for many years. I think I got it now. Bloodthirsty deserved our respect when he just surpassed the immortal realm. If he had had more time and chances, he could have broken this incipient extent to get rid of the prison. Then, he could have flown freely to the world out there. Pausing for a while, the God Lord said, "He was killed in the end, but we didn't destroy him. The real owner of this universe had used our hands to kill him." The four heavenly kings still looked baffled. The God Lord sighed and nodded to them. "Without the experience on Desolate 10,000 years ago, if I hadn't had the Genesis fruit, how could our clan have risen? How could I have led the experts to kill him?" Listening to him, the four heavenly kings were shaken. They screamed, "You mean, Desolate is? It's the thing that owns this universe. Although it got hurt and divided, Desolate is the brain. It created this universe. Our god clan and the other three big clans were created by the four wisps of its soul. Inside Desolate is the fountainhead of power Upanishads. All of our power Upanishads come from there. Desolate is the principle and the truth of this cosmos. Just like the way we control our incipient extent, it can rule all creatures in this universe. It can rule over us. However, its body was divided into 5 parts, leaving it in such a wounded condition and puzzle consciousness. Otherwise, Bloodthirsty couldn't have existed. It wouldn't have used our hands to fulfill its wish. Pausing for a while, God Lord continued, "Lives and souls born in this universe have its seal when they are born. It's what makes us pathetic. We will be bound to this place. It can control us because those are the rules. Just like we can wreak havoc in our incipient extent, it can destroy the world with a flicker of its mind." Bloodthirsty's dramatic fate occurred because he was born in this cosmos, so he got its mark on his soul too. If not, with Bloodthirsty's power, it would have been enough for him to break out of this prison to fly in the real vast universe. Sighed God Lord. Bloodthirsty's devouring power Upanishad and the other 8 power Upanishad had never existed here before him. Where did he get them? Easygoing was skeptical. Desolate is a creature from the absolute beginning era, but it isn't the only one here. The Bloodthirsty Force's Holy Land, the Dark Abyss, is also a creature from the absolute beginning era. That creature has the form of the cosmic black hole. It can devour everything. "Have you ever seen the Dark Abyss swallow the life stars?" said the God Lord. The 4 heavenly kings were puzzled. Light asked, "Didn't Bloodthirsty use his devouring power Upanishad to do that?" "That Dark Abyss is an absolute beginning creature. Bloodthirsty got his devouring power Upanishad and the 8 power Upanishads from that creature. However, Bloodthirsty was created by the blood of the God Clan, Immortal Demon Clan, Heavenly Monster Tribe, and Imperial Dark Tribe. Bloodthirsty should be the first creature that Desolate had ever produced, I think. Anyway, no one knows why the Dark Abyss gave him the power Upanishads. These things remain as an unsolved riddle. I have spent 10,000 years to think, but I haven't gotten anything yet." God Lord shook his head. "So why did you summon us, Master?" asked Carefree. "Besides Desolate and the Dark Abyss we've known, another absolute beginning creature has been awakened. This creature has resided scatteringly inside the space basin. When I broke through to third sky of Immortal Realm, I'd encountered it there. I didn't know what it was at that time, though. When Bloodthirsty told me his last words, I finally understood it after so many years," said God Lord. "There's another creature from the absolute beginning era?" The 4 heavenly kings were frightened. "That thing stays in many different corners of the chaotic space basin. It used to be wounded seriously. That's why it has been sleeping for billions of years. Gradually, after a long time of accumulating energy, it has woken up. In fact, it needed a couple 100 million years to wake up completely. Perhaps this cosmos will be gone and we won't exist anymore. However, someone has provoked it and woken it up." God Lord's eyes flashed. "Our old friends are there. They're about to receive its wrath. What we need to do now is to wait patiently for a chance. I've been recovering my power for a long time, but I have just reached second sky of Immortal Realm. If we can kill that thing and absorb its soul, I can recover my full energy and I can even break the Immortal Realm. At that time, I will have the power to break this prison and Desolate's rule. It will make me a creature from the absolute beginning era too. Even if Desolate recovers fully, I think I can resist it." The 4 heavenly kings were excited. The god blood in their bodies seemed to boil, their fighting will rising unceasingly. Almost at the same time in the spacious subterranean palace on the Tsunami Star, the four immortal realm experts including Tianxia, the president of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce, Caesar, Ling Xiang, and Lorraine were discussing some crucial matters. They were talking about their great scheme to make the bloodthirsty force and the God clan risk their lives together, giving them the opportunity to become the new overlords of this cosmos. While discussing, Tianxia suddenly turned abnormal. A strange light shot out of his eyes together with so many symbols moving inside his pupils. Beams of bright divine light radiated from Tianxia's body like rainbows twirling around him. It was extremely magnificent. Tianxia was talking, but he then stopped with a puzzled face as if he didn't hear what Caesar, Ling Xiang, and Lorraine were discussing. Tianxia. Tianxia. The other three couldn't help but call him to wake him up and continue their meeting. Tianxia was still indifferent. Not many people knew that Tianxia's power Upanishad was exactly like Ziyao's, which was from the divine light. In fact, each generation of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce had cultivated many different auxiliary power Upanishads. In fact, many people who knew Tianxia only thought that he had mastered the fire power Upanishad because he was an outstanding blacksmith himself. However, Caesar, Ling Xiang, and Lorraine knew that Tianxia had a special power Upanishad, which was his main power. It was the divine light power Upanishad that was similar to the God clan's light power Upanishad. However, its mysterious abilities were totally different. At this moment, divine light radiated from Tianxia. The mysterious symbols moved in his eyes, and he gradually murmured something unclear. This kind of murmuring was some sort of archaic language that even Caesar, Ling Xiang, and Lorraine, who had extraordinary knowledge, didn't understand. One thing they knew: Tianxia acted so strangely now. It looked like he had fallen into the bedevilment, resulted from his failed cultivation. Ling Xiang and the others were stern. They discussed to see what they should do. However, Tianxia then looked like he got lightning in his head. The puzzled look disappeared from his eyes. He resumed his sound mind. He pondered for a few seconds and then said, "I don't feel well. Please leave me alone for a while. Wait for me, please." Then, Tianxia flashed and disappeared from the room. He reappeared in the deepest place inside his underground palace, which was the place he hid the jade coffin. The walls of this room were covered with mysterious and complex drawings and formations. A pond was situated in the middle with the strange and marvelous power. The light shadows blended together in that pond and made it an incredible door to someplace. As soon as Tianxia appeared in the chamber, he immediately sank into the pond and coughed a lot. After each cough, his body twitched as if something was trying to invade his body. His face became so cold and clear, which was similar to Ziyao's previously. He looked cold and arrogant, like a god looking at his creatures without any human emotions. The pond where he was soaking had many strange images of vague giant worms. No one knew where they were headed. Waves of cold energy came. Beams of brilliant light shot out from the pond and entered Tianxia's body. The energy rippling from him now was so terrifying. If he let them continue to expand, they could destroy Tsunami Star entirely. So many mysterious symbols flew out of the walls. Millions of them became a thick mesh net that covered the palace to shield it from the energy-attacking wave from Tianxia's body. The terrifying energy that could destroy Tsunami Star was forced to stay within Tianxia's body. He shrieked painfully like a beast in a disastrous situation. His body exploded and bled hard. It looked like he would die in the next second. It seemed like he was undergoing some incredible transformation. Chaotic Space Basin. Minghao, Xianhe, Frederick, De Carlos, and Lei Di, the 5 immortal realm experts, had joined hands to subdue the giant worm. They all looked serious, as if they were facing the strongest enemy in their entire life. Every time the big worm moved, the 5 of them were shaken hard, as if they got hammered in the chest. They looked helter-skelter, indeed. Shiryan couldn't join the battle at such a level. He could only watch them. He looked horror-struck, as he had never thought that there was something in this universe that could resist the joined force of 5 immortal realm experts. He had an extremely insecure feeling as he could feel the danger coming closer. This sensitive feeling came from his co-soul and shook him entirely. He didn't know what would happen. Everything here had surpassed his knowledge. What Minghao and DeCarlo said had destroyed his knowledge accumulated until now. Crack! Crack! Suddenly, the noises came from the blood vein ring in Minghao's hand. Minghao had taken the blood vein ring to seal the ring spirit one more time. But because of the giant worm that had hurt DeCarlos, he had to turn and deal with the worm. Shiryen didn't know if he had finished casting or improving the seal. But now, when the blood vein ring sounded strange, Minghao utterly grimaced. Shiryen's face also changed. He suddenly remembered what Minghao had said. Minghao said that the colossal worm seemed to help the ring spirit break the seal. Chapter 1337. Doomsday is coming. Chapter 1337. Doomsday is coming, _ Crack! The blood vein ring sounded like an eggshell shattering. Minghao hadn't reacted when a blood light shot out and disappeared altogether with the blood vein ring. The ring spirit had broken the seal. Minghao was using his full force to seal the worm so he couldn't do anything. He turned grimaced and bewildered. It looked like he got hit hard as his soul-like body faded all of a sudden. He was shaken and his soul was wounded because of the big worm struggling. He pulled himself together quickly and called Shiryen. Check where it went. Shiryen flickered his mind and sent his soul consciousness away. Just like he had sent an army of billions of fish in the space, his wisps of soul consciousness tried to see to which direction the ring spirit and the blood vein ring had gone. Unfortunately, the ring spirit and the blood vein ring didn't leave a bit of aura. The faint connection between Shiryen and the ring spirit was cut off utterly. It has escaped the turbulent space current. I don't know where it went. I've lost the connection completely. After a while, Shiryen replied, his eyes solemn. He knew the ring spirit was also a soul from another universe. It was mysterious and no one had known anything about it yet. However, deep in this chaotic space basin, the giant worm could affect the ring spirit and help it lift the seal. Shiryen found it was extremely inexplicable. Is it true that the ring spirit and the giant worm have some connection? Is it something that they've planned beforehand? Otherwise, why did the worm have to help the ring spirit get rid of the seal? Layers of riddles filled Shiryen's mind. For the time being, he felt like he was hovering in the middle of some foggy space. Not good. It's increasing its power. What's going on? He had transformed into his immortal demon body. His entire body now had spikes, his eyes as crimson as blood. Around him were rivers that carried energy fluctuations of death and life. He was urging his power to swarm over the worm. However, he didn't look at ease at all. Quite the contrary, he screamed in fear. DeCarlos, Lady, and Frederick also said that they realized that the worm was increasing its energy unceasingly. Deep inside Minghao's dark eyes was a magical, floating light. It was the connection with innumerable wisps of his soul. After a while, his soul-like body shook violently as he spoke with fear. The entire universe is changing dramatically. DeCarlos flickered his soul consciousness hearing that. He was shocked too. Oh my god. Xianhe, Lady, and Frederick looked at them, their faces asking and worried. Brother, you try all of your power to hold it. I'm going to show them what's going on out there, said Minghao. Both of his hands pulled the void as if he was making a mirror that could reflect the entire sky. Different galaxies appeared in the mirror. Currently, there was the same worm in each area that was identical to the one they were fighting here. Those worms moved around the sea of stars and invaded many high-level life stars. They had released sticky tentacles, drawing and swallowing so many warriors. 11 giant worms were attacking 11 high-level star areas. Surprisingly, they were in the battlefields where the bloodthirsty force and the God clan were fighting against each other. Each worm was even bigger than a planet. They had earth-shaking power, indeed. As soon as they emerged, they had subdued all outstanding warriors of those high-level star areas. Slowly, they invaded the star areas like it was Doomsday, swallowing all creatures. The giant worms had countless tentacles jutting out of the bodies together with many mouths on bodies. Minghao's mirror was clear enough as the experts here could even see the despair on the victims' faces and their extremely helpless screams. Even giant worms had invaded 11 high-level star areas and taken down the life stars. In the middle of the universe, Doomsday seemed to have come to many star areas. No one knew how or why the giant worms arrived. Anyway, in this moment, everybody was filled with terror. Thus, the aura of the massive worm made them so feeble that they couldn't even have a thought of resisting. It was the aura that was beyond their worst imagination. The entire sea of stars was boiling because of the giant worms. The experts of the bloodthirsty force and the God clan stopped their fight to report to their leaders. Why are there 11 more worms? Xianhe soaked in the blood sea. His entire body was red as he shouted in fear. Lady, Minghao, and Frederick looked at DeCarlos. I should have thought about this earlier. DeCarlos looked bitter. I've seen many places with similar clouds in the chaotic space basin. However, I hadn't thought that they could fuse and create those terrifying creatures. Not 11. They're 1. They're like my soul, which are the clones of the same body. It's like 4 ancient continents detached from desolate. They have the same aura and soul energy fluctuations. They're 1. 11 worms have swallowed the warriors in the other areas. It leads to the energy increase of the worm we're dealing with here. They can transfer the energy to each other, Minghao said sternly. Shiyan nodded. He could see that the 12 worms were actually just 1. They had been scattered in different areas in the space basin to capture warriors who had accidentally gotten here, taking their energy to recover. It was the same principle as Minghao's souls could transfer energy to each other. The thing they called the absolute beginning creature could do the same. It could do even more. Its 12 selves had the same aura and energy fluctuations. There's a barrier between our space and the chaotic space basin. There are barriers between the galaxies too. How could they get there easily? We understand the power of those barriers. Without the right method, it's not easy to cross. Something is wrong here. If it can get in easily like that, it should have done that earlier. Why would it wait until now? Asked DeCarlos. The sea territories of those 11 star areas are destroyed. The space passages were torn open in just a blink of an eye. Those sea territories are utterly destroyed. Minghao squinted, his face dark and sinister. Currently, there is only one who can do that in this vast universe. Tianxia. DeCarlos changed his visage. As he used to be an honored member of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce, Tianxia respected him a lot. He knew the competence of Chamber of Commerce. In this vast sea of stars, only Tsunami Chamber of Commerce was capable of destroying the sea territories of 11 star areas at the same time. Even the God Clan and the Bloodthirsty Force couldn't do that. Those star areas had always put up guard against the God Clan and the Bloodthirsty Force. Only Tsunami Chamber of Commerce could use its trading activities to cover for its real operation in the sea territories without being noticed. That's how it could break the sea territory abruptly like that. The sea territory was the entrance to a star area. As it was destroyed through some special method, all the space passages opened wide, which was enough to let the giant worms come through. DeCarlo's scream had intensified people's complexions. Tianxia was the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He controlled a domineering force in this cosmos. No one knew why he had opened the sea territories to welcome the gigantic worms. However, his cooperation had helped the worms get into the place without a single obstacle. And now, the ring spirit had broken the seal and run away. 11 worms were invading the star areas, and the one they were confining here was struggling to get out. After each second, the massive worm's energy increased even further. Obviously, it didn't need much time to get rid of the confinement and counterattack. Doomsday is coming. DeCarlos looked worried as if he didn't have any trick to perform now. We can't put up with it anymore. We shouldn't have provoked this creature from the absolute beginning era. We should have let it sleep. He regretted, but it was too late now. As it had escalated to this, everything seemed to get stuck, and they couldn't do anything to help it anymore. This one is the brain. As long as we can destroy it, we can solve the problem. Minghao suddenly got his sound mind back. It's really hard to seal the creatures from the absolute beginning. It's almost impossible to destroy them utterly. I think you understand this. DeCarlos gave a forced smile. Then we should hurt it badly, said Minghao. Any solution? DeCarlos shook his head. Minghao pondered for a while as if he had finally made up his mind. Yeah, I have a solution, but I don't know what it would result in. However, this is an emergency situation. We can only try. Xianhe, Shiyan, and the others had their eyes brightened when they looked at him. Everybody knew that Minghao would never shoot an arrow without a target. If he said he got a solution, it was 100% true. However, this worm was so formidable. They couldn't seal it even if they joined hands. What kind of solution did he get to wound it? Everybody was so curious that they could die just to know how. I'll find you guys a person. Minghao's eyes changed. His usage of space power Upanishad wasn't weaker than De Carlos's. He had created a sparkling door and sent a wisp of his soul consciousness through the door. A silhouette emerged from the door. Shiyan was surprised. He couldn't help but shout, "Wetterson!" Surprisingly, it was Wetterson, the one who had almost obliterate Fiery Rain star area, the hybrid between the man tribe and the god tribe. He had terrifying energy with the aura from Gato, the chief of Corrosion Force. "What did you call me for?" "You've saved my mother and our man star, but I only agreed to help you deal with the God Clan." "There's no God Clan here." After Wetterson got out, he looked impatient with a murderous aura. He had traveled a long way to return to his homeland to save his mother and his fellows from the Breckelfeld family's slaughter. However, after he had arrived, he found that the Breckelfeld family had already ordered to murder his tribe. Minghao, who had observed every move of his secretly, had saved them beforehand. Of course, he did that to have Wetterson on his side. Wetterson was grateful. He told Minghao that he would go against the God Clan. What Shiyan had thought was that Minghao had helped him achieve and arrange properly. He thought he had successfully recruited Wetterson. Because of many killed man tribe's warriors in Wetterson's homeland, his resentment at the God Clan had totally burst out. His name is Wetterson. When he was small, his appearance was different from the others of his own kind because of his god bloodline. The elders of the tribe had abandoned him in a pond on Man's Star. He had absorbed all the erosive liquid in the ponds. That liquid had Gato's blood and the power from our master's remains. Minghao looked at Shiyan and said, "Give me master's remains." In this universe, only Wetterson can currently take in the energy from master's remains. After he takes in the energy, he can release the erosive energy ultimately. Even if he can't melt down this giant worm, he still can hurt it a lot. Chapter 1338, Frantic Bursting. Chapter 1338, Frantic Bursting. Wetterson would never forget what happened to him when he was just a little child. That event had changed his life forever and predestined him to not be ordinary. He was born a mixed blood between the God Clan and Man tribe. When he was a small child, he looked much thinner and more handsome than any other kid in the tribe. He was weak, but he knew how to use earth and heaven energy to create a strange magnetic field that could control things. His special, deadly field power Upanishad didn't help him earn respect. Instead, it made him an alien in his own tribe. After the elders checked his blood, they found that he wasn't pure. They thought that he was a monster, so they abandoned him in the deadly swamp area. The water in the worm was filled with acid poison. Even warriors of the Man tribe were eroded to death if they fell into the swamp. When Wetterson was too young to understand how cruel people could be, he was thrown there. They let him survive on his own. As soon as he got into the swamp, he had to taste the most dangerous agony in this world. His body slowly eroded and dissolved. However, facing death with a lot of screams, he had survived unknowingly. He could even feel all the poisonous water in the swamp that had been drawn into his body. This process took 3 years. 3 years later, the swamp dried up. Wetterson returned and destroyed the elders who had thrown him there. With his unrivaled power, he became the top warrior of the Man tribe. Eventually, he became the Lord and the Man King of the Man tribe. Shiyan, give him master's remains. Let him absorb them. Only when he becomes mad and triggers the power from master's remains can he erode this absolute beginning creature, said Minghao. Shiyan was surprised. Xianhe and the others looked stern and heavy. They were surprised and they looked at Minghao, expecting a clearer explanation. Gato died utterly that year. Minghao looked at the others. Before he died, Gato had received master's remains. He died on the Man Star, Wetterson's homeland, in a low-level, rural star area. He died with Master's remains. However, his power Upanishad was very special. After he died, his corrosion power Upanishad remained and covered Master's remains. After so many years, Gatto's corrosive power had successfully dissolved that piece of Master. Gatto's power and body were dissolved in that swamp area. Thus, that swamp was the essence of his corrosion power Upanishad, which had continuously eroded Master's remains. When Wetterson was abandoned there, it was the moment the corrosion power Upanishad had finally melted Master's bone. He was so lucky. He should have been dissolved there. No one knows how he could absorb all the essence of the swamp and get Gatto's power into his blood and flesh altogether with the power from Master's bone. It's also the reason why he can reach the immortal realm power level when he bursts out his frantic power despite the fact that he is at second sky of incipient god realm cultivation base. What has bestowed him the terrifying energy isn't Gatto's corrosion power Upanishad. It's the power from Master's bone. Minghao told them what he had concluded and assumed. People were looking at Wetterson as if he was a dormant demon that could destroy the entire world when he got mad. In fact, when he was in Fiery Rain's star area, if they let Wetterson continue to be in his frenzy, he could have destroyed the entire Fiery Rain's star area. All was because of the power in Bloodthirsty's remains. Right now, the absolute beginning creature that had been dormant in the chaotic space basin for billions of years and was much older than the four great creatures was awakened. It was as powerful as a destructive god. The other 11 clones of it were annihilating the 11 star areas at the same time. Its host body here had its energy increase massively and continuously. Minghao and the others failed to seal it. It seemed like no one could subdue this thing in this vast universe. Minghao was begrudging. Eventually, he had to take out the furious bomb, Wetterson. He had told everyone what had happened to him, and now he wanted to use Wetterson's magical power to damage this creature from the absolute beginning era. Listening to him, Wetterson looked grief-stricken. Slowly, a harsh light appeared in his eyes. Why do I have to help you guys? How do I know if you are telling the truth? If you don't cooperate with us, everyone here and many more living in the 11 star areas will be destroyed. Perhaps this entire universe will collapse. Your family can't survive this disaster. Minghao's cold voice chilled people's hearts. He looked at Wetterson and said simply. He rose one hand and gestured a touch. The images in the space mirror became clear again. In 11 star areas, the giant worms had attacked each of the lively life stars. Their tentacles tied the warriors and drew them into the stomachs. The warriors there had to suffer from tragic deaths. Wetterson looked at the mirror, his face cold. After a while, he turned to Shiryen. The others also turned to Shiryen. These pieces of remains are taken from Lingxiang, Caesar, and Lorraine. I intended to bring them back to the Holy Land. But now, it seems like they have a much more important role here. Shiryen touched his forehead and 3 jade boxes flew out of his incipient extent. The boxes with Bloodthirsty's remains fell on Wetterson. Wetterson rose his hands to receive, his face cold and dark. However, a magical light shot out of his eyes when he touched the boxes. Oh, I feel close to the things inside the boxes. Everybody was shocked. How should I absorb them? He looked at Minghao. I don't know. No one has ever successfully figured out the secret of Master's remains. The ones who got the remains have spent 10,000 years to study. Unfortunately, even the God Lords failed. You're the only one who has succeeded. I can feel Master's aura from you. I think you should figure out how to absorb them yourself, said Minghao sadly. Wetterson was stunned. During this time, the worms struggled harder. Xianhe, Frederick, De Carlos, Minghao, and Lady had to focus wholeheartedly to arrange more barriers. The rivers with the power of death and life, billions of soul wisps, thunder dragons, different spaces, and corpchi ropes tied the worm. The 5 of them wore stern faces as they were under tremendous pressure. Lady had turned into his dragon form, roaring and thundering. Apparently, they had to endure a harder resistance from the worm. Then, a graceful body emerged from one of the meat lumps of the giant worm. Her cold eyes didn't convey any human emotions. She was arrogantly and proudly looked at the others. She spoke a strange, unknown language. piercing through layers of barriers to reach 11 star areas. It was Xiao. She stood on the giant worm as if she was standing on the summit of an imposing mountain. Compared to the worm, she was so minute, but her eyes and her posture said that she was the master. The beautiful divine lights were like 5-colored clouds that wound around her body and made her extremely beautiful. She suddenly turned to look at Shiryen, her eyes showing some strange emotion. Her lips parted as she said one word that was different from all known languages. But Shiryen understood. That word was desolate. Xiao called him desolate. Boom. His co-soul deep in the core of Grace Mainland had come to Shiryan's soul altar quickly after it had pierced through layers of barriers. The clusters of heaven flame supported the co-soul. The co-soul floating above the flames was like a more magnificent flame releasing dazzling and formidable energy. That energy surged and washed around Grace Mainland, shaking the peripheral area. Don't look at her. Minghao shouted, his saber-like voice stabbing Shiryan's brain. Shiryen felt so cold. He woke up and bit the tip of his tongue. His immortal demon blood turned into a warm current and released his whole body energy in just a blink of an eye. Sink! He screamed in his soul. The co-soul from the soul altar directly flew into his incipient extent and turned into a vast sea of fire there. The co-soul had shut itself down. After the co-soul had entered his incipient extent, it cut off all kinds of connection. He didn't hear Xiao's voice anymore. When he couldn't understand her voice, the feeling of his soul shattering disappeared. He suddenly felt like he survived a disaster. He knew that if he hadn't been resolute enough to send the co-soul to his incipient extent to cut off the connection with the other could invade his soul and burst off his host's soul and co-soul. He didn't dare to look at Xiao anymore, not even a glance. He forced himself to focus on Wetterson. Then, Wetterson had opened all the 3 jade boxes. Strangely, the invisible pieces of Bloodthirsty's remains had become visible after he touched them. Right after that, Wetterson decided to apply the most direct method. He put the bone into his mouth and swallowed directly without even chewing. The massive bone moved through his throat to the stomach. This horrible scene made Shiryen sweat in fear. He thought that the bone could tear the man's throat in any minute. Wetterson swallowed 3 pieces of Bloodthirsty's remains at once. Don't you want to chew it a little bit? Shiryen asked, feeling strange and chilled. Can't chew. Wetterson had to wiggle to swallow the bones. He answered with a red face full of wrath. Then, his belly ballooned. It was ballooning at a speed that naked eye could observe. It was like the process of a 9-month pregnancy shortened within several seconds. Wetterson's stomach became swollen and sounded strange. Wetterson paled immediately, clutching his stomach and screaming as if a beast was dying. His voice was earth-shaking, indeed. He was drowned into madness again. His body became taller, and the waves of earth-destroying erosive energy diffused from him. He was many times stronger than when he was in Fiery Rain Star area. After he had swallowed 3 pieces of Bloodthirsty's remains, he seemed to turn into some sort of monster. The formidable aura on his body increased continuously as if it would never stop. It was much faster than the increasing speed of the worm's energy. It was horrifying to the others. Roar! Wetterson roared and shrieked. His body seemed to explode. The pores in his entire body frantically emitted erosive gas that blended in his special deadly field. Everything expanded in just a blink of an eye. Scatter. Stay behind the worm. Let the worm bear his erosive energy. Minghao shouted ear-piercingly. Everybody hurried. They didn't hesitate to dodge the spear. All moved at their fastest speed to hide behind the giant worm and let it face Wetterson. Chapter 1339. Good Fortune Fills Up to the Sky. 1339 Good Fortune Fills Up to the Sky. Xiao's eyes didn't have human emotions when she stood on the giant worm. All of a sudden, a 7-colored light shot out of her eyes. It seemed like she was frightened for the first time. She looked at Wetterson, her face grave. At the same time, the giant worm struggled harder and raised the waves that could shake the space and time, releasing the world-destroying energy. Minghao's pressure multiplied. It seemed like the giant worm suddenly rocketed its energy, which almost shattered the net of barriers confining it. It had forced Ming Hao's group to release more energy to fix the net. They had to use their god power massively. Shi Yan didn't join their sealing work. At his cultivation base, he couldn't join this operation. He looked at Wetterson. The thick erosive energy wildly emitted from Wetterson together with his expanding deadly field. The space in this turbulent basin sizzled like boiling water. The erosive energy brought within the destructive aura that could dissolve any creature. It was so terrifying. Eventually, it reached the giant worm. The worm struggled more fiercely. "Subdue it with your full force," shouted Ming Hao. Xian He, Frederick, De Carlos, and Lei Di were using their supernatural power at second sky of a mortal realm and applying the power Upanishads they had been cultivating for 10,000 years. The blood-red rivers had subtle changes between life and death. The corpse chi had turned into many ropes that could even tie down the world altogether. Different destructive spaces multiplied, and the outraged thunder dragons were attacking the colossal worm altogether. The massive worm was fixed at its spot. Finally, Mad Wetterson's erosive energy had arrived at the worm. Ming Hao's eyes had a happy light. He squinted, and the barrier on the worm's body slid apart. A sucking force came out of the slit and drew Wetterson's erosive energy into the planet-sized worm's body. Puff, puff, puffed. The fierce erosive energy madly came like the strongest acid pouring on the giant chunk of meat. The giant worm fumed thick, dark smoke. It shrieked in pain like an outraged beast. After Wetterson had swallowed the 3 pieces of Bloodthirsty's remains, his wildness burst out with unimaginably incredible power. It looked like he had to burn his vitality to trigger the power in Bloodthirsty's remains. That kind of energy was beyond people's knowledge. It had strengthened the corrosive power and made it able to destroy the entire world. A thick, dark mist diffused from the worm's body as the corrosion power Upanishad hit it. The thick mist then congregated into countless floating clusters of clouds. They looked like they had individual lives and were trying to get rid of the worm and the danger. Boom! Right at this moment, Shi Yan was shaken hard. His body couldn't help but shake violently. The acupuncture points in his entire body acted like massive pumps with endless capacity. Innumerable dark clouds flew out of the worm like a school of young swallow birds returning home. All of them overflowed toward Shi Yan and entered his acupuncture points. A surging vitality moved violently inside his acupuncture points. It was so abundant that Shi Yan whined in pain. So many jet black clouds fumed out of the giant worm had entered Shi Yan's acupuncture points. Strangely, they directly turned into mysterious energy without being filtered or refined. It was like a current of warm water or original fluid that could make life evolve. After moving around the vortexes in his acupuncture points, the energy emitted directly. A part of the mysterious energy entered his incipient extent. The world in his incipient extent expanded immediately. In just a blink of an eye, so many dazzling, diamond-like stars were born. On those stars, when Shi Yan's thought changed, the mountains, rivers, and forest appeared together with the clouds in the skies. Except for having insects or creatures, the worlds in his ethereal extent weren't very different from the real world. Another part of energy entered his limbs and seeped into his veins, tendons, skeleton, blood, and even his cells. The mysterious, unknown energy was absorbed by his body like a sponge that sucked water. It was a marvelous feeling that he couldn't describe. Nothing could be compared to this. His life and body sublimated at the same time. He had a magical feeling as if he had been transformed like when he had first descended to Grace Mainland and soaked in the blood pond. Countless jet-black clusters of clouds that drifted away from the worm body should have some wisps of soul consciousness within. However, Shi Yan's devouring power Upanishad had controlled his acupuncture points and absorbed them all. The clouds moved one round through the vortexes where the wisps of soul consciousness in it were destroyed, leaving only the mysterious, pure energy. This sort of pure energy was like the original fluid that could filter life and give a tonic to his soul and body. His body, soul altar, and incipient extent sublimated altogether. Wetterson had used 3 pieces of Bloodthirsty's remains to create catastrophic, erosive energy. He was now much stronger than Gatto. His erosive energy had attacked the worm and made it disperse and flee, which gave way for Shuryan's devouring power Upanishad. Shuryan was just standing and watching indifferently, but now, he had become the one who was the best at this. He had taken in every black cloud drifting away from the gigantic worm. Wetterson was sinking in his insanity. The worm could have dodged his erosive energy. It could have at least run away. But right now, Xianhe, Minghao, and the others were trying to seal it. They were fixing it here and making it face Wetterson's erosive attack directly. The billion-year-old absolute beginning creature had emitted mysterious energy when it got hurt. This kind of energy was like pure energy from the origin. It didn't need to be refined or filtered before Shuryan could use it. It had boosted Shuryan altogether. At this moment, Shuryan felt so comfortable. It was like the path of an ordinary human heading to be a warrior and a warrior becoming the almighty god. Every second, his bones, blood, and flesh were soaked in the energy from the acupuncture points. It was the first time he felt like his body was an ocean that would never be filled. Every piece of him, including his bones, blood, flesh, cells, and even the tiny hair, had become so greedy that they had swallowed all the energy from the acupuncture points without feeling tired. It was his instinct to evolve. His incipient extent was expanding too. Innumerable stars were twinkling. His sea of stars widened and his space was enlarged. The energy from the massive worm was greater than his cognition. It was much more powerful and miraculous than the energy he had taken in from the warriors throughout these past years. This sort of marvelous energy had seeped into each of his tiny cells. At the same time, his god power ancient tree had the tonic from the mysterious energy. However, it was different from the past, and the god power ancient tree didn't grow up as it was filled. It changed. The crystal branches of the ancient tree had connected to all veins of his body magically. At this moment, the god power ancient tree and his veins slowly fused into a whole. Shuryan was shaken hard. He knew what it meant. The god power ancient tree was the source of the power, and the veins were the key channel to perform the power Upanishad's abilities. Every time he urged any kind of power, he needed to draw the energy from the god power ancient tree, which then pumped through the veins and transformed through his soul consciousness and power Upanishad. The process when the energy was poured into the veins from the god power ancient tree often slowed down the preparation of an attack. It was because the god power ancient tree stayed in the lower abdomen and it wasn't connected to the veins. However, from this moment, the branches of Shuryan's ancient tree had directly connected to each of his veins. As soon as his mind flickered, his god power would surge vehemently into his veins. He just needed time to form a thought in his mind to strike a blow. There would be no delay or energy consumed along the way. He could maximize the effects of his abilities. Wetterson was still madly releasing his power and using the last bit of energy inside Bloodthirsty's remains. The massive worm twitched and struggled harder. It could stab the soul. It had forced Minghao and Xianhe to deal with it. As Lady had just entered second sky of Immortal Realm, it was almost his limit. Blood trickled down the corners of his dragon mouth. Xianhe and Minghao understood clearly that Wetterson's terrifying energy showing was because of 3 pieces of Bloodthirsty's remains. After the energy inside the bones ran out, he would be like a lamp running out of oil. He couldn't maintain the attack for a long time. If they couldn't hurt the worm and make it dormant again, all of them would turn into ashes. Thus, they didn't regret hurting themselves to use their greatest powers that they had hidden for a long time to subdue the worm and force it to receive Wetterson's erosive attack. No one had paid attention to Shuryan. In their eyes, the one who was called the newly elected master of the bloodthirsty force was just a small character who didn't matter at all. A second sky of incipient god realm warrior couldn't do anything in this area. They didn't care about him, and they didn't have time to care, either. Thus, they didn't know that while they were trying their best to seal the massive worm and Wetterson was burning his vitality to urge Bloodthirsty's remains, Shuryan was having the most magical quenching time in his entire life. Save me! All of a sudden, a fearful, soft soul message arose in Shuryan's brain. Shuryan lifted his head to look at Ziyao standing on the massive worm. This time, Ziyao didn't speak the language of the absolute beginning creatures. Shuryan understood her words. At this moment, Ziyao had half of her body stuck into the meat of the worm. Her beautiful face was sad and painful, her eyes begging him sincerely. Shiyan also looked at her. He was suddenly doubted and baffled. But shortly after, he became resolute. "You're not her. It's me. It's me." Ziyao had tears lingering in her eyes as she gently wiggled and showed that she was trying to flee. Shiyan could see something like tendons tying down her slim waist and legs. She couldn't get rid of them. "You aren't her." Shiyan followed his sound mind, closing his eyes and not looking at her. "You're so cruel," Ziyao screamed in a high-pitched voice. Shiyan was indifferent. "It's true that I'm not her. But she's me. She's part of mine. Her soul has fused with 10 wisps of my soul consciousness. She's now a clone of mine, a clone with human emotions and desires. If I perish, she will also die. Do you really want to see her die?" Ziyao's voice drilled into his head, but Xianhe and Minghao didn't realize that. Listening to her, Shiyan was shaking hard because he knew that she spoke the truth. It was somehow a soul intuition. Chapter 1340, The Unchanged Heart in Front of Thousands of Enticements. Chapter 1340, The Unchanged Heart in Front of Thousands of Enticements, _ What the absolute beginning creature said was like thunder booming in Shiyan's head. Strangely, he agreed with its last idea. He knew that the creature told the truth. Ziyao was now a part of it. If it perished, Ziyao would turn into ashes, and nothing would be left behind too. The other had considered it a chance to overturn the situation. It wanted to force him to attack Wetterson or tear Minghao's seal. Previously, he didn't have such an ability. But now, the energy fluctuating from his body was very terrifying now and over his understanding. He believed that if he tried his best, he could break this balanced situation. The magical power from that absolute beginning creature had wholly sublimated his bones, soul, and incipient extent. He had reached an entire, new height that even he was so astounded himself. "As long as you agree to help me, I'll offer you a great opportunity. I'll give you a power that only the absolute beginning creatures could touch." Ziyao guided and enticed him. Each of her words now had an eccentrically charming power. It attempted to sink Shiyan and make him work for her. A power that only the absolute beginning creatures could touch. Shiyan's eyes brightened. His heart beat frantically, his soul excited. He immediately grabbed the hidden meaning in the creature's words. This power could be the power that the God Lord, Lingxiang, Caesar, and even Minghao, Xianhe were trying to find but fail. It was the mysterious power that only Bloodthirsty knew and used. Ziyao's enticement was like a demon hitting Shiyan's brain directly. His face turned odd. Clenching his jaw, his face twisted as if he was trying hard to resist this temptation. His eyes gradually turned crimson. After a long time, he faced the sky and roared, laughing loudly inwardly. "You can't persuade me. You're a creature from the absolute beginning era that the 5 immortal realm experts are joining hands against to seal for dozens of years. Who can make you perish? You won't die. That man can't kill you. He can only hurt you. You can't shake my heart. You can't entice my sound mind." Boom, boom, boom. In his head, the star dragons emerged and weaved a thick mesh net to make a barrier that covered his brains. He didn't listen to any of her words or let any wisp of the soul enter his head. He had closed his mind. Ziyao's soul fluctuation couldn't get into his head anymore. The begging gleam in her eyes vanished instantly. They looked cold and heartless once again. She gazed at Shiyan and spoke a whining language that no one understood. Then, she retracted into the big worm's body. Right after that, the giant worm quieted down. A thick, murky, yellow liquid oozed out of the worm's skin. That kind of liquid slowly condensed and froze, creating something like bright yellow keratin that functioned as a layer of marvelous armor and covered the worm's body entirely. It wasn't struggling anymore. It didn't try to lift off the seal anymore and just retracted its body like a hedgehog to defend. It had given up on resisting. Although the erosive energy Wetterson had released was surging and rolling torrentially, its effects were reduced by a lot. The bright yellow keratin on the worm was like a magical barrier that could reduce the erosive speed. The worm still fumed black clouds from time to time, but they became much diluted. Apparently, as it had used all the power to defend, it could reduce the damage to a level it could endure. Now, although Shuryen had shut himself, his acupuncture points were constantly taking in so many clouds to benefit his entire body. Minghao suddenly stopped releasing energy, his eyes dark. Something is strange. The host body is using all of its energy to defend, but its clones are still destroying the world out there. When they all come here, how will we deal with them? De Carlos didn't feel relief at all. He felt more restless, his voice heavy. Minghao looked at the space mirror. Except for Shuryen and Wetterson, everybody was watching the bright mirror. Their faces turned dark. The 11 giant worms were moving around and swallowing almost all of the warriors on the 11 life stars in different star areas. Then, all of them dangled their massive bodies and headed to the sea territories. Although they were giant, they moved swiftly. After one flash, they could move through so many life stars as if they could break the space limit. Its clones want to use the sea territories to reunite with the host body here, said De Carlos in fear. Everybody had ash-gray faces as they felt so helpless. Even Minghao wore a dark face as if he was dispirited that he couldn't change the result no matter how many tricks he had. God Zenith. The God Lord wore a calm face on the mountaintop. His eyes were like the moon and the moving sun. He looked at the hazy star area, his eyes piercing the void to the area of nothingness. Behind him, carefree, divine martial, easygoing, and light, the 4 heavenly kings were standing quietly like the mountains. The elders of the Elder Committee and the heads of the 12 families were kneeling on the ground a little further from the others. They all looked somber as if they had encountered an apocalypse. There was a deep, dark streak in the middle of their foreheads that seemed to not disperse. 11 planet-sized worms appeared out of nowhere in 11 star areas where the God Clan was fighting with the bloodthirsty force. They came directly to the main life star of the star area and ate up all the warriors there. Those warriors included the members of the God Clan and the members of other forces. However, no member of the bloodthirsty force was harmed. This was because the God Clan had claimed and based on the most important planet of each star area. The elite troops who had trained for 10,000 years there had become delicious meals for the big worms. It was a lethal attack on the God Clan. They thought that those worms were the secret weapon of the bloodthirsty force and that they were the most ancient ancestors of Heavenly Monster Tribe. They needed the guidance from the God Lord, so they gathered here, waiting for his decision. Feng Zhou represented the Elder Committee and Byers represented the heads of the 12 families, kneeling on the ground and looking at the God Lord in patience. The God Lord was an extraordinary soul. 10,000 years ago, he had led them to expand the God Clan's territory billions of times. He had killed Bloodthirsty, the one everybody had acknowledged as the peerless warrior in this cosmos. This time, they believed that he could bring them to a higher peak. They believed it so deeply. Each member of the God Clan surviving that time had admired the God Lord from the bottom of their hearts. They worshipped him as he was their real God. This was because the God Lord had never failed them. President, Feng Zhou crossed his arms in front of his chest and called. The God Lord was the previous chief of the God Clan, but he wasn't from the 12 families. He was from a small, declined family of the God Clan. However, he had crossed even the sky when he made his debut. He had suppressed the 12 families of the God Clan and created the Elder Committee. He had become the president of the committee that controlled all the activities of the God Clan. Together with the benefits, he had brought the God Clan to the peak of glory. When Feng Zhou called him, the chiefs of the 12 families and the other elders also called him quietly. The God Lord looked at the void. He didn't even turn his head back and spoke indifferently. The time hasn't come yet. Keep waiting. The 4 heavenly kings turned around and frowned at Feng Zhou's group, their faces dark. Immediately, Feng Zhou and the crowd kneeling on the ground felt so cold. They lowered their heads more and didn't dare to speak. The God Lord's eyes radiated a bright light that then turned into a light curtain carrying 6 heavenly fragrant soul-soothing jade boxes. 5 of them contained Bloodthirsty's remains and the other one kept his skull. Heavenly King Light found that skull. The 6 boxes arose and hovered in the middle of the light curtain. The God Lord looked at them quietly as if he was planning something. "Thornton," he suddenly hissed. "Yes, sir." Thornton, the chief of the Breckelfeld family, replied to the call. He thought that the God Lord wanted to make him bear the responsibility for the failure in Fiery Rain Star area. "Wetterson, the mixed blood with the Man tribe, who is his father. Is he still all right?" asked the God Lord. Thornton was bewildered and answered honestly. "He's the son of my uncle Moya. He was hurt severely in the operation of killing Glue 3,000 years ago. He was brought to God Perishing Land to recover. However, Glue's chaos power Upanishad had killed him slowly. Where are his remains?" The God Lord's eyes brightened. "In our family's graveyard. We used a 10,000-year cold jade coffin to preserve him. Each of us powerful members will be kept in a 10,000-year cold jade coffin after one of us in the battlefield. We've followed the rules you've set." "We have never changed it," Thornton answered respectfully. When the God Lord fought the world in the past, he had set up many rules. One of the rules was that the chiefs of the 12 families had to use a jade coffin to preserve the experts whose names were written in the Book of Gods. The later generations could visit their coffins after every 100 years to remember their precursors who had died for them. Remembering the late precursors and encouraging the young generations to admire the experts made them consider dying on the battlefield a pride. "Excellent," the God Lord nodded and said, "Use the teleport formation to return to your family and bring that jade coffin here for me. I want Moya's body. Remember to do it as quick as possible." Pausing for a while, he added as if he couldn't ease his mind. "Carefree, you go with him. Do it as fast as possible." Carefree didn't say anything. He didn't even leave Thornton time to talk more. He grabbed Thornton, walking to the nearest teleport formation. Fengju and most of the chiefs of the families were skeptical, but no one dared to ask. They knew the God Lord would never make a mistake. Each of his orders hid a deep meaning that they couldn't understand. They trusted him unconditionally. After a long time, a cold moonlight emerged. Carefree reappeared and held up a 10,000-year cold jade coffin. To make it faster, he had ditched Thornton and returned alone. Boom! He dropped the cold jade coffin, then stood upright and spoke nothing. The God Lord nodded to him and showed his content. He rose one hand to lift up the lid of the jade coffin. A frozen corpse of an old God Clan warrior was taken out. That corpse wore luxurious clothes. Although he looked pale, there were no decayed spots on his body. It was the effect of the 10,000-year cold jade coffin. "Forgive me for offending you." The God Lord slightly bent his body to show his respect to Moya's body. Then, his 5 fingers cut Moya's cold corpse open. The 6 jade boxes with bloodthirsties remains floating in front of him opened at the same time. The 6 invisible bones were shoved into Moya's stomach. The God Lord made some hand seals. Billions of subtle symbols flew out of his eyes and fell into Moya's abdomen. Moya's body shrank like a balloon without air. Several seconds later, Moya turned into a small swoosh. Moya's corpse exploded and vanished. No one knew where the God Lord had thrown him. Chapter 1341. Transform. Chapter 1341. Transform, _. Deep in the chaotic space basin, the giant worm had crouched its body with a layer of bright keratin. It was using its best power to defend. Wetterson's erosive energy had eroded it, but his power was reducing. At Minghao's level, he could feel the worm still have its energy slightly increase. It wasn't really hurt. At this moment, the other 11 worms were storming toward the sea territories to reunite with the main body here. The 5 Immortal Realm warriors joining hands couldn't kill this massive worm. If they had to face 11 worms at the same time, they wouldn't have even a chance to win. Minghao was full of stratagems, but he didn't have a solution now. His eyes turned dark and his mind heavy. Xian He, Frederick, DeCarlos, and Lei Di winced. They felt so helpless facing this massive worm. They knew that not long afterward, the 11 clones of this worm would arrive. Once they came, they could only run helter-skelter. The universe where they dwelled and the star area they were fighting against the god clan to reclaim wouldn't exist anymore. At this realm, perhaps they could get into the sea domain of nihility to survive. However, the warriors under Immortal Realm would perish and become ashes. "Tell us all the solutions you got," hissed DeCarlos. Minghao frowned and thought. He rose one hand and struck a strange light, which then quietly pierced to someplace far, far away. Yan's heart suddenly had a vibe. The strange light Minghao had released seemed to fall into the middle of Yan's inner world. He thought and found where Minghao's soul consciousness had gone. To Grace Mainland. Indeed, shortly after, Holy Beast Azure Dragon walked out of a light door Minghao had made. He was the 6th Immortal Realm expert coming to this area. Right when he arrived, Azure Dragon saw the worm erode. His face changed dramatically. "An absolute beginning creature. Xing Xiao. Long time no see," muttered Lady. Azure Dragon didn't care about him. He looked at the giant worm and looked terror-struck. "Why is there an absolute beginning creature here?" "How do you know it's an absolute beginning creature?" asked Xian He. "Well, it's a giant creature and I didn't find my Heavenly Monster Tribe's aura from it. Of course, it is from the absolute beginning era." Azure Dragon looked at the others and lowered his voice. "I've lived longer than any of you here. My understanding of this cosmos is deeper than you guys a little. There are some old stories I know. Stop talking nonsense." Minghao snorted impatiently. "I invite you here to ask if you have any solution to deal with that thing." Azure Dragon looked at them and pondered for seconds. "If we've reached third sky of Immortal Realm, perhaps we will have the power to fight it once. However, none of us have reached this realm yet. I'm afraid it's not easy to deal with." After talking, he suddenly turned to Yan and screamed in surprise. And then, people remembered Yan, the one who they had neglected for a long time. They looked at him because they didn't know why Azure Dragon sounded surprised. After a flash, Azure Dragon appeared by Yan. He concentrated on Yan to assess him. He looked even more astounded and cried, "He's getting an overall sublimation." Everybody was baffled. Azure Dragon was bewildered. Seeing people not get what he meant, he spoke in a different way. "He's transforming in Bloodthirsty's path. It's a new life transformation in a new way. He's reaching the perfect state. It's a natural self-evolution that is similar to Ghost Hunter fusing with the blood of Immortal Demon Clan, Heavenly Monster Tribe, and Imperial Dark Tribe. It's the blood fusion to reach a higher form of life." Also, Yan is using an unknown power to fix the flaws of his living form. He will turn into the most perfect form. Now the others understood it. They were all shocked as they could never imagine such things. Countless years had passed by and Bloodthirsty had been recognized as the strongest warrior. Except for his unknown, marvelous power Upanishad, it was because of his tenacious, domineering body. He was worshipped as the most perfect fighter. According to Minghao, Bloodthirsty was the combination of the 4 great creatures. He had the advantageous features of all 4 races. His physical flaws were mended, and his living form had almost reached perfection. Ghost Hunter was an alien who was the closest to Bloodthirsty. With the mix of bloodlines, his life form had reached a new height. However, at this moment, Azure Dragon was saying that Yan was using a new method different from blood mixing to evolve his life form wholly. It seemed to be the first case ever in the past 100,000 years. "So you mean that this kind of life-sealed transformation is to evolve from the immortal demon to some higher-level creature?" He sounded shocked. In fact, he isn't a pure-blood immortal demon. He just has the immortal demon blood in his body. Also, he has slowly transformed to become an immortal demon warrior. Minghao is still calm. "I know his past like the back of my hand. His father comes from the Yang family, and the Yang family is the result of the relationship between an immortal demon precursor and a human. Thus, the Yang family had the immortal demon blood in their bodies. As their realm increases, they can generate immortal demon blood. Eventually, when they can replace their blood with the immortal demon blood, they can transform into the immortal demon body, the fighting form of the immortal demon warriors." Pausing for a while, Minghao continued, "All the members of the Yang family are mixed blood between the immortal demon precursor and a human. It's the same in his case. The human blood is really weak, but it has the most magical fusing power. It can blend with almost any other blood. This is a very unique feature. As his realm increases, his life form enhances and triggers his power to transform into the immortal demon body. However, in nature, he still has streaks of human clan. Today, he's evolving to a higher life form. It's like when he has transformed into the immortal demon body. Anyway, it's a special method that we don't know yet. Minghao explained, his eyes astounded with emotions. Minghao's keen eyes, Holy Beast Azure Dragon, gave a gentle nod. Shuryen has fused with the Genesis Fruit and his co-soul has fused with Grace Mainland. His life form is already complex and unpredictable. I can't see the causes. However, I know that after his life form finishes transforming, his progress of understanding the power Upanishads and the soul form will change altogether. The high-level creatures were born with advantages. It's similar to how the 4 great creatures are stronger than the other races and Bloodthirsty was stronger than us. I'm just afraid that his transformation speed won't catch up with the destructive speed of this universe, sneered DeCarlos. Hearing him, the others darkened their faces as they had to return to reality. Right at this moment, Shuryen was quietly circulating energy in his acupuncture points to refine his entire body. He opened his eyes all of a sudden. He could hear what Azure Dragon and the others discussed. He knew his current condition. While he was still surprised, he found that the aura from the giant worm suddenly became thicker. He turned to see Wetterson and then discolored in fear. He yelled, "Wetterson!" Hearing him, people were startled when they saw Wetterson. Wetterson's stomach suddenly swelled up while he was releasing endless erosive energy. It looked like someone had just stuffed something into his body. A formidable energy that could destroy the universe gushed out from him like billions of volcanoes erupting at the same time. His terrifying power was enough to obliterate this world, indeed. Even Minghao, Azure Dragon, and Xian he discolored. They had a sudden fear of a new time coming. Wetterson was so intimidating at the moment. The massive worm was in its defending state, waiting for the clones. But now it also recognized the danger. Just like an awakened hedgehog, its massive body shivered and released waves of bright light that could twist the bright-colored, chaotic space currents. Countless beams of outer space streamers showered. Strong gusts, icicles, and chaotic, deadly fields swarmed all together. The turbulent space current seemed to turn into a massive furnace whose temperature continuously increased. The colossal worm moved and seized the chance when people were startled because of Wetterson. It tried to get rid of the confinement. That group of experts didn't know what had just happened to Wetterson. Seeing the worm trying to escape, they cheered up and used all of their power to seal it. They seemed to see hope now. Although Wetterson had exploded and was now a pulp of blood and flesh, he had paid with his life to urge the tremendous energy to attack the big worm. Even if it had balled its body to defend itself, it couldn't stand the power like the last glow of Wetterson's life. That energy was enough to destroy so many star areas at the same time. The worm attempted to flee because it was scared. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Wetterson's erosive energy overflowed on the massive worm. Thick dark clouds fumed out of the worm's body again. Shuryen's acupuncture points had gathered them all and turned them into the mysterious energy without refining. It was sent to his entire body. His body was still absorbing the energy greedily as if there was no limit. Slowly, he felt something strange in his body. Although he was still in the immortal demon body, the spikes on his elbows, shoulders, and knees had become more fearsome and sharper. They had grown longer too. He suddenly felt itchy on his back. The electric currents came with the energy gushing out of his acupuncture points, heading to his back. The bones, veins, and cells in his back absorbed it all. Crack! Crack! Crunchy sounds echoed from his spine. The skin on his back cracked. His bones suddenly grew longer. He had a terrifying change. A pair of wild, ferocious bone wings unexpectedly jutted out from the crack on his back. The bone wings were as transparent as jade and they twinkled. The veins and tendons in the wings were connected directly with his god power ancient tree. They were like his arms that he could control smoothly and agilely. Flap, flap. As he thought, the bone wings flapped. The feeling of something becoming whole with his body arose in his mind. He was dumbstruck. The mysterious energy from the worm was taken in, and the changes in his body continued. The fingernails on his hands also changed. They grew 1 meter long, and they were as sharp as the sabers. The light reflected on them was cold and harsh, as if it could tear all creatures and cut their bodies open as easily as flipping a hand. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.